do. There are times I gotta see. So many places in my head. So many places I could be. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. When you tell me that you're gone, I know I've heard it all before. From the memories in your head, see me running for your door. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. Can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. Thank you! Thank you so much. Thank you. You sang that song so well.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I'm your host for today, and I think every day almost. Peter Dixon's my name, and my very special guest is Matthew Lucio. How are you, Matthew?
I'm doing fantastic.
I was telling you off air, and apologise everyone for the delay. I'm always apologising. We almost need to say the show starts at 1, not 12:30. I was chatting to Matthew off air, and I was letting him know that I'm a super fan of his show, the Advent History podcast, and I've listened to so many episodes in a row from the start right through. How many episodes are there, do you reckon? The last one I finished on was your QOD series, and then I got a bit sidetracked. How many do you reckon I've listened to, if you counted from the beginning to the end of QOD?
To the end of QOD, you're probably approaching 100.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes me feel good.
Congratulations. You get a gold star at Sabbath School this week.
And look, I appreciate your show, and I've learned so much from it. And I bang on a lot about QOD, Questions on Doctrine, 1957. And I got a lot of pushback in my early days, because I have always said it's kind of the ground zero for the current tensions by presenting Adventism to the world. And we're going to get into all of this, but by presenting Adventism to the world in a kind of a little bit more, hey, we're evangelicals like you kind of way, it caused a rift in the church that to this day is really split. And sure, 1919 was important, 1888. There are many other significant dates within Adventism, but 1957, the release of Questions on Doctrine, why it was released, how popular it kind of made the Adventist Church for a while after. 4 million people, 4 million members by 1984, 1 million at 1957. Created this kind of fertile ground for the progressive Adventists, for the Des Fords. And come 1980 and Des Ford's Glacier View, I think the church kind of split in two without realizing it. And anyway, when I listened to your QOD series, is there about 7 in that series?
Yep, 7 episodes.
Amazing, fantastic work you've done there. I realized that I was probably right, and I want to be able to claim that. Because everyone was telling me I was wrong. And I thought, no, if Matthew Lucio has got a similar kind of way better and more nuanced and deeper assessment, I'm a little bit on the right track. Anyway, I'm not going to talk much this show. I'm going to listen and learn. Let's begin. And thanks everyone watching. Let's see if we can just quickly bring up a couple of messages. Oh, we're already getting heaps of messages. Let's go. We've got, who is this? Facebook users, by the way, don't forget to put your name in so that I can see. Oh, that's Deanna watching from Tennessee. And we've got Ray is watching from San Diego. We've got Not Here. This is my first time listening to this. I'm not sure if the people are saved by the finished work of Jesus. That is the most important issue. Not Here. Thanks for being here.
Well, that's a show, guys. Thanks so much for listening.
Ray says, no one cares. You were first heretic. Are you proselytized? Anyway, Ray, good to have you here. Look forward to your comments. George Tishi is here watching from Reno, Nevada. Oh, I'd love to come and visit you there. It's a nice part of the world, I hear. And he's hoping for fresh air after yesterday. We've got Fred Simmons, greetings from Battle Creek, Michigan, home of a citadel of Adventism, although most of its institutions have died on the vine. Strength, Peter. Thank you. And Deanna, I think, watching from Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. Hey, Rodney's watching. We've got GD. Matthew, hand pink waving. What does that mean? Oh, by the way, Matthew, just show us your T-shirt.
Oh, yeah.
That's
because she said so.
Because she said so. Love it.
Did I dress for the occasion?
And Rodney has said, Peter, you were schooled last night.
Oh, come on.
Thank you, Rodney. Peoria in the house. Oh. Matthew Rice. Where's Peoria? How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, Peoria. That's right. That's where I live. And Matt here is a church member. We're about 2 hours south of Chicago.
Cool. And Jillian Ford says, hello, Matthew.
Hello, Jillian. Good to see you.
And we'll just read one more, I think, one or two. Ian Gonzalez, watching from South Bend, Indiana. And Angela is here. Hey, Angela, from California. And
hold on. GD wants to buy a T-shirt.
Let's bring that up.
Yeah, don't deprive me of a sale.
This is right. Where can people buy that? Because there's another one too. What's the other T-shirt? So for those that don't know, and I just mentioned it to you off air, over at our other sister group, Voice, SDA People's Voice, go and join, by the way. It has almost the same number of members as SDA&A, but you get to have, you can post. Here, it's more me writing posts and people commenting on posts. But I started that group so people could dialogue. But anyway, Peter Mashenko was putting up your T-shirts and promoting them over there. So we're going live into Voice today, which we don't normally do.
Good.
So how can people get that T-shirt?
Yeah, it's real simple. AdventistHistoryPodcast.org. There's a store there. You can get some fun Adventist history related swag.
I love it.
And please, by the way, before he gets into this, please donate to SDA Q&A as well, because I want to see this. I want to see super chats on YouTube at some point here. And so
Thank
like and
you,
subscribe if you haven't done it yet, and donate.
mate. I appreciate that. Let me even do some little self promo. If you'd like to support the channel, that takes people to PayPal, and I think we've even got my paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music. And this week I've got $25 so far, Matthew. So that's surging ahead.
Are those Aussie dollars or American
That's
dollars?
Aussie dollars. So that's about $900 USA, isn't it?
Yeah, that's with inflation. I don't know what anything is worth anymore. But come on, we can double that tonight. We can double that tonight.
Right, that would be amazing. So thanks everyone for joining. Healthy audience already, and my very special guest is Pastor Matthew J. Lucio, founder of Advent History Podcast. I love the little sneaky way you've got Advent History Podcast, and then the Advent, and then the IST in history. Looks great.
Well, Peter, if you haven't noticed, our branding was not done by the highest class of marketers.
Hey,
Seventh-day Adventist is a brutal mouthful.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. What will we call our church? Hey, look, great to have you here today, everyone. We're going to be talking about Questions on Doctrine, a book that came out in 1957, I believe. And my parents graduated from Avondale College, I think, that year. And they have often told me of how incredible the feeling was of being an Adventist at that time. There was a palpable sense of Christ's soon return. A lot of them went off. My parents went to New Guinea soon after and were missionaries, and there was a sense of let's get the word out there. Jesus is coming back. And they were raised in that pre-Questions on Doctrine book era where things were a little bit more traditional Adventist style. But they speak of it as being a really beautiful time where, the imminent return of Jesus and this camaraderie. They talk about going to the Wednesday night prayer meetings and Friday night Vespers and Sabbath school and singing, and just a real energy there. So at that point, I'm going to get you to take over now. Tell us what happened. Tell us what's Questions on Doctrine. How did it come about? And why am I right that it's ground zero for current thinking?
There's something Freudian going on here. But look, I think it's far more complex than I think most people realize. I mean, you've obviously got evangelicals who felt betrayed by some of their representatives in these Adventist evangelical conferences. That's what we call it. That's the conversation that preceded the publication of Questions on Doctrine. So when we talk about Questions on Doctrine, we really mean this whole kind of conversation that was had
leading up to it.
And so obviously some evangelicals felt betrayed because they think Adventists are a cult, and some Adventists felt betrayed because, well, they wouldn't call evangelicals or fundamentalists a cult. They're Babylon, right? And our leaders as Adventists sold us down the river, changed our doctrine, all these sort of things. And so there's a lot to disentangle, I think, when we're studying QOD.
Yeah, it's not as simple as I often portray it, but I still feel like people need to really understand what happened there, because it really helps define what I believe. And again, it's generalizing, but I believe these two general groups: the traditional Adventist, the progressive Adventist, and of course, there's nuances between the subgroups within all of them. There's also kind of a third group, which is the administration, which kind of is their own little version of Adventism. So, how far back do we need to go to understand 1957 Questions on Doctrine?
Okay, so here's where I like to start. I like to start by just having a very brief conversation about the relationship between Adventists and what we call evangelicals. They wouldn't call themselves that, but and it was kind of frosty at times. There were, on a local level, there were plenty of opportunities for Adventist pastors and Sunday keeping pastors to work together, renting a hall or renting their church or whatever. I mean, on the ground level, it wasn't that tough. But among the theological class, the people who write books, the thought leaders of these respective groups, there was a lot of fire being traded back and forth. And there's an upcoming article in the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists that is going to be dealing with this and going through that whole history. We don't have to go through it here. But for me, I think it's important for the Adventists to understand, especially the Adventists who think that this is some kind of conspiracy. It's important for them to understand that this kind of, if you want to call it a change in the church, this was a long time coming. QOD was not a sudden stab in the back. It was a long time coming. All right. So you have the 1919 Bible Conference you talked about. We witnessed their difference of opinion between our church leaders, many of our church leaders, and the people in the pew. And it's almost as if the church leaders are afraid of the people in the pew. They're afraid of, and given what happened next with Claude Holmes and Judson Washburn leading a campaign to oust Arthur Daniels from the presidency, one could say that they had some reason to be afraid of how people in the pew might look at them. And so you had that. That was a conversation about Ellen White's inspiration, right? And as we all know, that was a conversation that was never finished. In fact, it was never had in public. The record was buried for decades. But we see at least a glimpse of this cleaving of Adventism. And it certainly didn't begin in 1919. But I think after Ellen White's death is a good place to be looking for change, right?
Yeah.
We also have. Go ahead.
Can you unpack a little bit more about 1919? I want today to be kind of have an opportunity to dig deep into some of these things, and then people can go and research for themselves. But just tell us, what was the 1919 conference? Who were the players? What was kind of observed as the two big differences? What was emerging with Prescott and Daniels and the others? Can you give us a bit of background, what it was, where it happened, and what went on there?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was just there's a whole long history to it. It was a Bible conference. We only had a few of those, and we had one in the 50s as well. But, it was, to me, it was the first conversation among many church leaders about what do we do with Ellen White and her writings. It was a conversation about sources. It was a conversation about how inspiration works. And it was a very frank conversation. People were going back and forth about, nobody was like, I don't believe she's a prophet. Of course not. But, within the framework of Adventism, of Orthodox Adventist thought, how do we relate to her? How do we explain her to the outside Christian world? And these are conversations, I guess, you probably didn't need to have while mom is still alive. I mean, you could just ask her, but now you can't. Now you've got to make sense of it. Now you've got to make sense of it. So, there was a conversation about, was Ellen White verbally inspired? Was every word inspired? And, many Adventists believe that. And I think that's probably where a big rift was between church leaders and church members, where many members believe that every word she ever said or wrote was inspired of God. And as you can imagine, later on in the 20th century, when we talk about the sources, her reliance on sources, which of course you talked about yesterday with your guest, if you believe every word she ever said and wrote was inspired, then you are set up for a huge disappointment, dare I say a great disappointment, later on. But, Arthur Daniels, W.W. Prescott, both of them in 1919 said that we don't think Ellen White was verbally inspired. And so, in hindsight, you look at this and you're like, why didn't you say that out loud?
Yeah.
You could have averted a lot of pain for a lot of people at the other end of the 20th century if you would have been more intentional about telling people that every word she ever said was not verbally inspired. Of course, they didn't know that, right? They didn't know where things were going. Why rock the boat?
Yeah. It seems like Prescott would have, to me, had the most accurate assessment of what would happen if they didn't make it more public. Is that correct? Yeah.
I think so.
So he was one of the ones saying we should be saying this to the public.
Yes. Prescott, H.C. Lacey talked about it. Daniels talked about it. And, so I think we have we see a difference you see different camps. And I think, look, as I think I actually wrote in the 8,000 comments in the chat yesterday when you were live. You know, my own view of Adventism has always been a coalition. The whole idea with William Miller was that you had a bunch of Christians, some were Baptists, Methodists, Christian Connectionists, whatever, and they had all these doctrinal differences, but what united them was a belief that Jesus was coming soon, and probably around 1843 or 1844. But it was a coalition. There was William Miller had no intention of kind of melding these into a new denomination, right?
No.
Well, after the Millerite experiment blew up, Adventism kind of inherited that, and it focused on more than just the second coming. It focused on Sabbath and these other things as well. But at its core, it was basically the same idea. Like, we have these very, very, very fundamental things in common: sanctuary, Sabbath, second coming, Day of the Dead, etc. And there's a lot of room to wiggle as long as you hold those things in common. And so I think just from the beginning of Adventism, it has been a coalition. It's never been a monolithic group of people that somehow fractured in the 20th century. It has always been different. And I think when Ellen White was alive, she was able to keep the thing together. Kellogg wanted to just go help the poor in Chicago, among other places. He wanted to build sanitariums around the world. Like, that was his vision for Adventism. It was basically kind of like to put Loma Lindas everywhere.
Mm.
And that was not Ellen White's vision. It was certainly not certainly not Uriah Smith's vision, the more kind of traditional apocalyptic types. But Ellen White held the whole team together. And so after her death, I think it's not a surprise that we start seeing some questions leading to kind of factionalization being more and more apparent. And so after 1919, it's 10 years later, the end of the 1920s, early 1930s, where there's another argument. This time it's over Bible translations. B.G. Wilkinson writes his famous, King James only. He said he calls the American Standard Version a Jesuit Bible, which is the most Adventist thing you could say about anything. And so, like, W.A. Spicer tries to calm things down, but why is Wilkinson getting on about this? Because people like Leroy Froome are using the pages of Ministry Magazine to push for the Revised Standard Version, right, or the American Standard Version. And so now we have this rift, right? And Froome, Froome is going to be central to the QOD story, of course, but he's kind of a stinker in the sense that behind many of these controversies, he wasn't there in 1919, but with the Bible translations, with pulling Adventism away from the semi-Arianism or Arianism, Froome is behind all of that. And when you read his later writings, especially Movement of Destiny, you realize, like, he calls the 1930s a new epoch of unity and advance. He perceives in the 1930s a radical shift for Adventism, not the 1950s, but the 1930s. And it just takes a while for that to be seen. Mm-hmm. So I mention all of this to say that when we get to QOD, sometimes people point to that and say, oh, that's where it all started. Mm-hmm. It started a long time before.
Yeah,
it really started with Ellen White's death. And so what we're just seeing the cracks kind of slowly form during that time until it becomes more and more open. And then you get Andreasen and Froome and company really going at it more publicly. And so it's just becoming more and more apparent. So,
yeah, it's kind of ground zero, but it wouldn't have been ground zero if there hadn't been all the different issues and events occurring prior to it. It's like the explosion, but the timer was set well and truly before that. I like what you're saying about it being a coalition. And is there any evidence of Andreasen starting to see that this might be coming? Like, people like Froome were predicting and planning, and maybe I might be wrong there, but they were heading towards, hey, we want to kind of present a more evangelical side Adventism even before Walter Martin comes onto the scene.
Yeah.
But was Andreasen aware that this was happening, or were people during the 20s and 30s and 40s pretty happy with how Adventism was going, and they thought, oh yeah, we're a unique remnant group? were they aware of the explosion that was about to happen?
I don't know that anybody was aware of it. I mean, because all of this happens very quietly, and I don't say that to allege like a conspiracy per se, but I mean, it's just sometimes we look at, because we have access to the letters of a lot of these folks that we study, and so we think, oh man, like this is, everyone must have been aware of this, and of course most people probably weren't. I'm sure most people were just enjoying their lives. If you read the General Conference bulletins, I feel like that's probably the best gauge we're going to get of what public information people had, or the reviews. And it's always we doubled our growth, or we built 10 new institutions, or whatever. It's always something successful. So I guess if you're a regular Adventist in the pews who just reads the review and maybe the General Conference bulletin, how do you put your finger on if you have any sense that something is changing? How do you put your finger on it? Now, when it comes to the Arian or semi-Arian positions that were part of these legacy Adventist publications, of course, there was an effort to expunge those. Now, how much did people notice that one edition of Bible Readings for the Home was a little different than the next? I don't know. You know what I mean? They didn't advertise it. They didn't publicize what they were doing. It just would have some words deleted. And, who noticed, right? I don't know.
At a grassroots level, it'd be hard to work out, but people like Prescott at the 1919 conference seemed to have, like he was almost looking ahead 40 years and predicting what would happen. So the leaders, and Andreasen would have been seen as a respected leader. I guess what I'm saying is pre-QOD, was there the same, were there progressive Adventists and traditional Adventists at loggerheads? I know that they didn't have the concerned brethren and the Fordites, but were there kind of loose groups of people where, like I guess at 1888 had a little bit of left and right going on?
Well, I mean, left and right, yes, but it's exceptionally vague, because I mean, when we look at Froome, I mean, Froome would be fully in the progressive camp, but I mean, he very much believed in all of these traditional Adventist doctrines, right? Like, he wouldn't be progressive today; he'd be conservative.
Yeah, and even Des Ford was conservative. Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic to talk about: left, right, liberal, conservative. I don't like those terms, and I'm trying to find better terms to talk about, because there are definitely people at loggerheads, and in the 70s and 80s it was clear you were a CB or you were a Fordite, and there were subgroups within that. But I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Like, what do you call the two different groups? I'm gradually moving to this progressive Adventist and traditional Adventist, but I'm fully aware that a progressive Adventist may have very conservative standards, love Ellen White. I'm not. It's not like politics, left and right. It's not even like left and right. Lifestyle things, and sometimes it's not even left and right theology, but there's a distinctive difference between what I see as the two groups. What do you think defines the two groups that kind of really grew up and became, the 1980 Glacier View was the next era that defined this, even cemented them apart even more?
Yeah.
What do you think are the distinctive differences between the two groups I'm speaking of?
Well, I don't know how. I mean, no matter what I say, it's probably going to offend somebody, but I'll take a stab at it, understanding that this is provisional.
Yeah. I feel like we're on a journey to try and, I might be totally wrong, but I feel like I can see these two groups, like definitely in the 70s and 80s, people lost their jobs if they were a Fordite and the concerned brethren, there was a definite definition of the two.
Yeah. So, I think, so if I look at Ford, if in this situation, I don't want to impose modern terms on them, but if in this situation we might call Froome, somebody like Froome, a progressive, I think it's somebody who wants to better engage with the world around them versus people who are content being kind of cut off from the rest of the world, whether it's the Christian world or the secular world, right? So, I mean, in the case of Des, he said time and time again, it's like our interpretation is not, he would often quote or cite the number of Greek scholars out there who said we can't interpret Hebrews this way. We can't interpret Daniel 8 this way. And he would appeal to them as authorities on the issue. Whereas I think if you were, you know, a CB or whatever, you like, I don't care what they say. Their opinion has no weight with me. They're not experts in my book, right? Because I just look at the Adventist world, and you know, like that's what matters. But Des was appealing outside of the Adventist world, and so was Froome, like, you know, and so was Frida. That's you know, the principles on the Adventist side of this conversation. It's like, hey, we want to have a good relationship with them, and there are other Adventists who are like, we don't care. You know, why do we need to have a good relationship with them? So I feel like that's
even today, it's like that.
Yeah, even today.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think that's probably the defining, I guess, germ between them is like, do you look outside of Adventism at maybe not the whole world? You know, Froome isn't worried about the Vatican. Can I have good relations with the Pope? But he looks at a group of Christians who are conservative Protestants, and he's like, we can get along with these guys. We have a lot in common. Let's try. And so that, I think that's what separates him. Do you look outside of Adventism and see something positive or not?
And that's interesting that he was probably, in listening to your you know, the Advent History podcast and your series on QOD, Questions on Doctrine, for those who don't know what that stands for. I got the sense that Froome was trying to engage with the outside world, as you said there, and it wasn't just that Walter Martin was about to, and Barnhouse were about to kind of include Adventists into their cult book. It seemed to be something he was and others were trying to do before 1957.
Yeah, and for people who think this is a conspiracy, you know, the Adventists who think that, I mean, this all started innocently enough because Unruh, T.E. Unruh, who was the president of the East Pennsylvania Conference, in 1949, he heard this fundamentalist Barnhouse on the radio, and he wrote him a letter saying, great program. And that's how it began. Like, that's it. It wasn't contrived. It wasn't cooked up in some committee somewhere to try to impose this on the church. It was just, you know, in Barnhouse, Donald Gray Barnhouse was shocked that an Adventist would appreciate what he said about righteousness by faith, because he thought, you know, all these guys are they're legalists, they're keep the law to be saved kind of people. And so that started the conversation, and then that conversation died because Barnhouse was a jerk.
Interesting. I've just noticed, Angela. I'm, by the way, everyone, I've got my comments switched off. It's my new thing. I look at them at the start, and then after the break, we go to them. But I have just seen Angela S. Lima has written, I thought QOD was written to deceive Walter Martin. And I used to think, I didn't think of it as a deception, but I did think of it, I imagined Froome and the others that kind of became the committee, Frida, and that put the book out in answer to Walter Martin. Yeah. I initially thought they were just happily going along being Adventists, aware that the Adventists have many, you know, that, like you said, it's a coalition. But when I would listen to your, yes, I initially thought Froome's sitting there going, what? They're going to put us in a book about cults? We can't be seen in a book about cults. Let's address that. We want the world to see us as not a cult. Where we're listening to your podcast, I realized that these guys were heading towards a bit of more of a progressive evangelical kind of connection with the outside world anyway. And so, and Angela mentions so that initially the thought was that to make sure they weren't included in that book. So tell us a little bit more about the Froome trying to become a little bit more connecting with the outside world, and then what happened with Barnhouse and Walter Martin. How did that kind of connection happen and create the fusion? The explosion.
I'll say this about the publication of the book. I think if you want to deceive people, you don't publish a book. You know what I mean? Like, if you're trying to pull a fast one on the Adventist membership or on the evangelicals, don't put it in writing where anyone can buy it and find it. You know, like, you just have your meetings with them, you tell them what they want to hear, and that's it, right? You've lied to them, you've tricked them. Now they're going to go publish something nice about you, and you just go about your business. But they went through an incredible effort as part of these conversations, which we can go to.
Do you think Froome, though, and that group that we're heading towards a more progressive connection to the outside world.
Yeah.
Do you think they knew, though, that by writing the book they would cause such a distinctive moment in time?
No, I don't. I don't think that they had. I think that there may have been a little bit of self deception sounds a little strong, but I think sometimes we tell ourselves what we want to hear, especially as church leaders.
Mm.
I think there was some wishful thinking. That's the phrase I'm looking for on the part of Froome and company, because I think that they were, part of this conversation with Martin is Froome would say, Adventists believe this, and Martin would hold up a book that had been published by the Review or Pacific Press and say, yeah, but you wrote this. And then they would have a conversation like, we got to get rid of that book, or we got to edit that, or we got to,
yeah,
you know
okay.
what I mean? So I don't think you go through that if you're not serious. But I think for Froome, there was an element of QOD represents how we want Adventism to be, as seen by the outside world. It wasn't how Adventism was, and I think that's what was misunderstood. It was what we want it to be, where we want it to go.
Yeah, okay. And sometimes by writing a book, it makes it so. And a lot of people, and in fact, it kind of did. The growth of the church post that book coming out, and the rest of the world going, oh, okay, well, Martin and Barnhouse say that they're okay, so sure. So it did achieve a certain amount of self-fulfilling prophecy. But do you think people like Andreasen were purposely kept off the committee because the way they wanted Adventism to look, they knew if he was on the committee that would hinder that?
Maybe.
Because he felt quite put out that he wasn't invited to be in the discussion.
Right. Well, I mean, I think if you think the entire existence of your faith is at stake, if you're Andreasen, you want the coach to put you in the game. Because he was the top theologian in the church in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
So why would I not be there? Why would I let this happen when I'm off the field? But
and kind of true in a way. Like if Froome must have had a moment where he went, right, we are putting together a committee, we are having chats with Walter Martin. Andreasen must have come up in the back of his mind.
Yeah. But to be sure, like I look at this as an impossible situation. It is impossible because knowing the membership of both the evangelical side and the Adventist side, if they caught full wind of what was happening, I think there was definitely an understanding that this would not go well. You'd have to answer a ton of questions, and likely it would be misunderstood and all of these things. But at the same time, you can't go the other way and keep it completely a secret. That does not invite confidence in what we're doing. So
yeah, you're right. Impossible.
And both sides paid for it. I don't think I don't think we can look at the situation and say, well, if they only would have done this, it would have gone so much better. I don't think there is an outcome that I can imagine where it would have gone so much better.
It was like a collision that was going to happen. It was going to happen. I like what you said there. That I kind of thought, wow, that's interesting. Both sides paid for it.
Yep.
And that's very true. And that is another way that confirms that there are two sides, because they both paid for it.
Yeah. Now, I'll say this. You asked me about Froome a minute ago. When we get to Movement of Destiny, I think it's page 435, he kind of goes through an autopsy of Adventism, and he admits that in the past we have emphasized the commandments, and he says that this has invited widespread misunderstanding. And he adds, and grave misunderstandings assuredly came. We now have to live with them and to live them down. We created our own unfortunate situation. So I think, now, of course, he's writing this 1971, I guess. He's definitely having QOD in the rearview mirror and Andreasen, and he's probably kind of, I don't know that he thought this exact way in the 1930s, but undoubtedly there's some truth to the fact that this is how he's always thought it, that his goal was to kind of undo the damage Adventism had done to itself by this narrow focus on the law without lifting up Christ first and foremost. That's what he says the antidote is, to emphasize Christ first and foremost. So I think to him, a chance to talk with evangelicals and set the record straight is a chance to kind of undo the wrong Adventists had
Yes.
done to themselves.
Yeah. One more thing about Andreessen in light of what you just said. My understanding was, and this is why I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, that it wasn't a situation where Andreessen was on the sideline and the coach says, come on and play. It was that he wasn't even aware that that was happening. And so
Yeah.
Froome definitely was like, well, I'm not going to bring him into the game. I think that's what he was thinking. But,
Yeah.
but I don't think Andreessen was on the side going, hey, I should be in there. I should be in there. I think he was suddenly like, what? Where did this come from? Is that true?
Yeah. Of course. I don't think he had any awareness that it was going on for a good long time. But I mean, like the point is like Froome could have said, we need Andreessen for this.
Yeah.
But didn't.
Imagine what would have happened if he had, and Walter Martin comes down and chats to Froome and Andreessen. Whoa, boy, that'd be fireworks there, wouldn't there?
Yeah, I don't imagine that would have gone as far as it did. And maybe that was the whole point, right? Like,
yeah,
Froome picked his team. I mean, he had to start with Unruh because Unruh started this whole thing. But Froome brought Anderson in, right, and Reed. So Froome got to pick the team, and so again, it's like it's to me, it's really complicated, and I think the story resists the easy conclusion of our leaders sold us out, because I get what Froome was trying to do. Certainly, he meant well. I don't think he was trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. I think he had a vision for the church of what had gone wrong in the past, and I think he probably saw his authorization was from Ellen White post 1888. Right, we need to be preaching righteousness by faith. And that had kind of flagged during the fundamentalist era. Yeah. And Froome is like, we got to get back on track with that and preach righteousness by faith. Here's the golden opportunity. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better opportunity to set the record straight.
Almost like a now or never opportunity, because the book that Martin and Barnhouse were about to print was going to put them into the cult basket. So it was like, this is out. Not only is this a good opportunity, if we don't do it now, we're going to be labeled a cult. And that's what would have happened.
Yeah, and I think it's worth talking about that word, because that still gets thrown around. And just personal rant, it irks me to no end, because it is a word. It is a word without any like real meaning.
What it does have, though, is, regardless of meaning, is that if you're labeled a cult in a book that all the Christians are going to read, no one's going to join your church.
Yeah,
even if it's unfair.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not like it's not a useful theological description.
No, I agree.
You can say somebody is unorthodox. You can say someone's heretical in terms of compared to some orthodoxy that you're comparing them to. But calling them a cult, I think that it's like calling somebody a terrorist today. There's like actual terrorists, people who commit acts of terror, and then there's kind of like the looser sense in which it's used. And it can be used to, you call, well, of course, here in the States, 10, 15 years ago, calling somebody a terrorist was basically giving yourself a license to kill.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it was a very dangerous word to be throwing around. And obviously, cult is not life-threatening, but it's aggravating, because it's like once that sticks to you, you can't really get it off.
It's character assassination.
Yeah, it is. So
And do you think there's a part of Barnhouse that was a bit of a sensationalist, and he wanted to release his book on the cults? They'd already released a book on the cults, hadn't they, where Adventists had been included? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, in 1955 is when Walter Martin's Rise of the Cults came out, and Adventists were in there. But it was weird, because we were in like the top 5 cults that he talked about, and he just hammers the other 4. But with Adventism, it was like he kind of equivocated.
Wasn't sure.
Yeah, he wasn't really sure what to do with Adventists, and so he kind of he said that Adventists denied the doctrine of the Trinity and the deity of Jesus Christ, but he basically says Adventist theology is so complex, I really haven't had a chance to study it. Right. And so that's basically where he leaves us.
So when Unruh gets word that Barnhouse and Martin are going to be adding Adventists to the cult book, was it the same book just being updated, or was there a new book coming out?
Well, okay. so just to disentangle that a little bit, backing up. So when Unruh and Barnhouse were corresponding, right? The idea was they were supposed to go out to lunch. Barnhouse proposed that, and Unruh was like, "Oh, good. So we kind of have like a ceasefire on anything he's going to say about Adventists until we have a chance to talk." Unruh, typical Adventist, sends Barnhouse a copy of Steps to Christ. Thinking, "Oh, we have a friendly relationship.
This will fix the problem.
This will fix the problem, right? I don't actually have to talk with him." I'm sure he wanted to talk with him, but in the meantime, he sent him a Steps to Christ. And so what ends up happening is in the June issue of Barnhouse's magazine, Eternity, this is June 1950, Barnhouse just just blasts Steps to Christ, just annihilates it. And annihilates it, and some of them are like the usual critiques of Adventism, but some of them are like really ridiculous. Like he calls Ellen White a universalist, which has got to be news to all of her critics.
What? That's the opposite of.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But he called, he's like, "Oh, she's dwelling too much on love. What about God's justice?" This kind of Calvinist critique.
Boy, that's interesting.
It is really interesting. And so Unruh would later write that he just kind of threw up his hands when he read that, like, well, I guess that conversation died. Never wrote Barnhouse back. Like this, it's over. Like what how do you follow that up? And so Unruh just kind of washed his hands of it and said, well. And but something really interesting happened though in January of 1953. And this is the first key that led to a change. Barnhouse, the 1950s were a period where fundamentalists were becoming evangelical again. So we have a lot of this. We have a lot of these shifts as people are kind of shedding their fundamentalist snakeskin and being a softer, cuddlier version of that. And Barnhouse seemed to go through something like that because in 1953 he kind of has this realization. Well, I can read a little excerpt here from this. You can definitely read the fundamentalism in this. This is what he says. "Early in my ministry, I conceived the idea that I must strike out against all error wherever I saw it. I used only one kind of ammunition. I hit an error wherever I saw it. If it was in Christian Science, Unitarianism, or in Romanism, I swung hard. If it was in some fundamental leader with whom I had 95% agreement, I swung hard at that 5%. So you're getting, okay, that's Barnhouse's approach to things. So even if you and I, Peter, agree on 95% of the things, Barnhouse is like, I just hammered that 5% we disagreed in until I guess you just beat the other person in submission or you walk away.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's Barnhouse before. And then he says, in this New Year's reflection, he says, I want to have a Christian fellowship with a much wider circle of people. I want to make my circle of Christian fellowship on the basis of the fact that a man is going to be in heaven with me. And if he is, why not get a little closer together here and now? Give him the benefit of the doubt on the things we do not agree upon. I believe that many of us have been the victims of religious McCarthyism. Wow. I don't know if that McCarthyism...
When was that written again?
1953.
Wow.
So, he goes on. Are you guys familiar with the whole McCarthyism thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
He says, I believe that many of us have been the victims of religious McCarthyism. Just as the senator from Wisconsin has yelled communist at almost anyone to the left of center, so there are men who have yelled modernist at anyone who disagreed with them on points which are certainly secondary. He says, I'm trying to think ahead. And he just he talks about the Cold War a little bit, and he goes on and, he realized if there's ever a nuclear apocalypse here, I hope that I can call out on a Sunday morning, let all who believe in the Lord Jesus come here. I have a loaf of bread and I'm going to share it with you. And he's like, I will pass this loaf around to the crowd and let all who will take his portion. And it would be good if we didn't have to wait until the bombs fall before we learned how to share and get along. Mm. So he had an epiphany. He was still really rough around the edges. And the reason why I called him a jerk earlier is because his attack on Steps to Christ, which is one of the most congenial of Ellen White's books, is just calling her a universalist. He says that when he wrote to Unruh, he said that I think Adventist theology is the stuff of Satan. Like this kind of just like really harsh, the way he described himself when he was younger. And he was that way until 1953, and he was still a little rough, I think, by our standards. But he had
Barnhouse you're talking about.
What's that? Yeah, Barnhouse.
It's interesting that Walter Martin, if Walter Martin wasn't involved, perhaps Barnhouse would have, he would definitely not have considered chatting with Froome and Unruh, etc. to come to in the kind of way Walter Martin had the rough edges. Which I like his version of rough edges. Barnhouse, I'm like you, everything. But Walter Martin, if it wasn't for him, this conversation wouldn't have happened either with Unruh.
Wouldn't have happened. Yeah. So I always say there's two factors that needed to happen for these conferences to work. Barnhouse had to have that change of heart. I don't know if we call it an epiphany or a conversion, a reconversion, or whatever you want to call it. But we needed to have that, and then we needed to have Walter Martin writing this book on Adventism. And so, Martin is bringing this idea. I'm writing on Adventism. I don't really understand them. And that's when Barnhouse is like, oh, yeah, I think I corresponded with an Adventist some years ago. You can go look in my files and find the letter. So he finds the letter from Unruh. Martin, it seems, was already familiar with Froome's work. He had a respect for Froome, just on a scholarly level. And so when he saw the letter from Unruh, he was like, here was a door that was open to chat with Adventists that never took place.
Yeah. Right.
And so he's the one who follows up on it, not Barnhouse.
Yeah. So what happens next? Hey, before we do that, I just want to bring up something. I do have my chats closed, but I've got my phone here, which is just popping up occasionally what people are saying on the Facebook group. And he just said something. I'm interested if you can help clarify. Where is it? I can't find it, but he said Martin's Rise of the Cults, 1955, did not mention Adventists. I thought it did. A footnote.
He calls them like the nearer of all the five things that he talked about, the five groups. He said Adventists were the nearest to being Orthodox. The reason why it mentions Adventists, and we know this, is because the by the time the book came out at the end of, I believe, the December, I want to say, or November of 1955, that was in the middle of the conferences. And so when the Adventists saw it, they were like, "Hey, I thought we were talking," but of course the book had been. That's
right, already. It just hadn't come into print. I'll just bring one more thing up that he asked before we talk a bit more about this Walter Martin connection. Carl has said Barnhouse attacks, and I interviewed Carl the other day as well. Thanks, Carl. Thanks for your comments.
Yeah,
and thanks for the interview as well. We'll have another one. Barnhouse attacks steps to Christ because he was a determinist and not Arminian. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
Cool.
So, I mean, among other reasons.
I want to, before we talk about Walter Martin a bit more and this connection that they have that leads to the writing of Questions on Doctrine, can you give me a brief assessment of Froome, Unruh, Reid, and Anderson, because they become quite big players? A brief, you're not a psychologist, I don't think, but the personality assessment of each of those. Were they on the same page? Just tell us a little bit about each one. And for those that don't realize, they became known as Frieda, Froome, Reid, Anderson, and Unruh. Unruh was on that term, Frieda, as well?
No, he was just, I think he just was chairing the meetings.
Yeah.
He was kind of the facilitator.
And you probably know this, but Anderson's brother, OK Anderson, lived in Kurumbong as I was growing up. And
oh, really?
I'd bump into him all the time around town, at the cafe, whatever. We'd have little discussions. A lot of the CBs lived in town here. I don't know if he was on the CB official list of 16 signatories, but he was I had no problem with. Nice guy. A lot of these guys were nice to chat to, unless you ruffled their feathers.
Yeah.
But if you can just give us a little insight into personality, character, where they sat regarding this progressive notion, if they agreed with Froome. But Froome, Unruh, Reid, and Anderson, and then we're going to dig into the Walter Martin connection and what happened in those meetings.
Well, I don't have as strong of a grasp on read per se. My area of emphasis, or my person of interest, I should say, was always Anderson. I have a lot of files on Roy Anderson, and of course he's one of your compatriots.
Mm.
I love his life story, and so anyways, that's kind of what led me to the QOD thing. Is like, oh, I want to study him in this role here. And Carl, I hear what you're saying. I know he didn't share all of them, but Unruh was instrumental in the one meeting that happened in August, I think, of 1955, that met at Barnhouse's house, because as the president of the East Pennsylvania Conference, Barnhouse lived in the Philadelphia area, so it was easy for Unruh to kind of help the Frida group get there, and how do you drive to his house and all these kind of things.
Right.
I don't actually know if Unruh was there, but he helped facilitate that.
Right, he was involved. Hey, look, as I've said, I wasn't going to do this. I just will quickly bring these in so they don't pop off the screen, because we know what we're saying next. We won't get sidetracked. Motor Sapien, how are you, Motor Sapien? Love when you join the show. Not sure if it was Martin or Barnhouse, but when they did the second look after QOD, they called Dr. Graham Maxwell from Loma Linda. Maxwell recounts that they published without talking their findings. Do you know much about that connection? I hadn't heard about that before, but I know that Graham Maxwell's name comes up often in the history, and I don't really know much about him. So maybe you can allude a little bit to that. And one other quick thing I'll just bring up. Gillian Ford, how are you, Gillian? Gillian's books are amazing. Volume 6 is about to come out very soon. I was going to hold it up, Gillian. It's here somewhere. All available on Amazon. Amazing books.
You got volume 6 out already?
It's nearly ready to come out. Probably not till January, I think. Tell me.
I sent her a picture. I sent her a picture of like all 5.
You've got all 5.
I've got all 5, and I thought I would get like a jewel in my crown or something when I get to heaven. Or something signed. I don't know, Gillian. We should talk. Is there like a frequent shopper thing?
Yeah, you'll get a star like me watching all your shows.
There we go.
And Gillian says, yes, okay, Anderson was definitely true CB and on the list, and possibly co-wrote the 1972 letter to all and sundry that Des was a heretic. I was going to say something about that, but I'll think of it later. So yeah, back to Maxwell, Graham Maxwell. Is there any more thoughts you wanted to share?
Yeah, I don't know specifically what Maxwell is referring to there, but I mean, there were definitely some who, so for instance, Cottrell read through QOD ahead of time and was like, this is not representative of where a good number of Adventists are at.
Interesting.
So there were warnings. There were warnings and concerns that, hey, I don't think this is going to go super well. Francis Nichol looked through it and agreed. So did Ted Heppenstall. But I mean, they've promised that they were going to publish something.
Yeah.
And how this is the impossible situation they're in, and whether people actually sympathize for that or not, it's up to them. But I look at it as like you told Martin and Barnhouse you're going to be publishing and yet how would it, and that these views represent the church. So you've kind of backed yourself into that corner. And then what are you going to do if you listen to people like Cottrell or Nichol or Heppenstall or whoever, and then you start having like revising this heavily? Then is it going to look like, oh, I guess that wasn't representative of their thought, because now look at them arguing over it. You kind of are in a tough spot. You wanted to send it out so you could say everyone had a chance to read it and everyone's good with it. But you also didn't want to discuss it too much.
No, and with Adventism being such a wide coalition, as you say, I think, like, who pulled together Frida? Who eventually decided this is the main 3 people that are going to kind of look into this? Because I can, as I look at exactly what you said there, I look at that and I think, yeah, I can see why they wouldn't have had Cottrell on there, because although he would have probably agreed with the content, he was aware this is going to cause a big problem, and that may have stalled the process. And I can see, as we said earlier, definitely why they didn't want Andreessen on there. So there's definitely some maneuvering going on. so whoever pulled together that committee, can you share who that was? Because it was a very, and I don't mean the word Machiavellian in a bad way, but it was definitely a maneuver to ensure that the book got printed.
Yeah. I mean, of course, they didn't begin with the book in mind, but
No.
yeah, it was Froome. It was Froome and Reed at first. And I'm not sure of all the reasons why Froome may have chosen Reed. He was a general conference official, so it lent some credibility to what was happening. Anderson wasn't added until a little bit later. And it was kind of like, in these diplomatic situations where if like the dignitaries from China are coming in, it's like, oh, well, we're going to bring, 15 people on our side of the table. So obviously we need to bring 15 people on our side of the table. You can never let them have one more than you. So it was like this negotiation where, they wanted to bring in Barnhouse. Martin talked about bringing in Barnhouse in addition to George Cannon. George Cannon and Martin were together, and then Reed and Froome were together. And so when they talked about bringing in Barnhouse, it's like, well, we need somebody else on our side. Then they brought in Roy because, he had extensive experience as an evangelist, and they thought, well, he knows how to talk to non-Adventists. So,
and you feel that he also played quite a significant role once he had been brought in.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about many of their specific contributions except Froome. We know a bit about him, but certainly he defended this whole process. He defended the conversations. He defended questions on doctrine itself. He didn't see it as a deviation from Adventism. And he was a fairly conservative person. He wasn't, by no means would we consider him a progressive today. But he thought it was a nice breath of fresh air, and we needed to be having this conversation with these evangelicals. So he was fully on board with it.
Right. Well,
so was Arthur Maxwell, by the way. I mean, he was kind of like
Arthur or Graham.
Arthur was.
Right.
He was over there in Signs of the Times.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Froome would write him letters, kind of leaking information about how things were going. Leaking. He had every right to do it, but he wanted them to keep it quiet, right? Don't spread it. And Arthur would write letters back saying, go team. I love what you're doing. He even told Froome, surely God has raised you up for this vital hour, almost like an Esther moment.
Interesting. So there's a bunch of them that have got this idea of what Adventism could be, as you said earlier. So let's get back to Walter Martin. And if people want to kind of get a real look into what he's like, personality, character, what his beliefs are, go and watch the 1984 John Ankerberg show with him and Bill Johnson. I've watched that so many times. It's an incredible watch. It reveals so much. But tell us a little bit about him, and then what happens next. He meets up with Unruh, I think. Do they actually just talk on the phone, or is there a hangout at a local cafe?
Yeah, they went to Starbucks. And I will have Unruh got caffeine. No, I don't know. I think they did have a conversation on the phone to kind of arrange the details. But the first meeting was going to be at the General Conference office. But I think what's hard for me personally to accept about all of this is this whole Kingdom of the Cult stuff, because Walter Martin was considered the preeminent expert on cults. And so in order to keep that crown, you kind of always had to be staying up on the latest thing that's happening with these miscreant sects. And, so that just kind of came with the territory. He was getting a good job at Zondervan, kind of being the head of their cult research. And so this is why it's hard for me to wrap my head around this, because I don't think that way. I don't look at Christianity this way, where we need to major in who's in a cult and, how are we going to respond to them? And we need to make sure we condemn them for being in this group. And I know, but it was a cottage industry at the time. Like we need to identify who's right and who's wrong. And then we need to go hammer the people who are wrong. And obviously Martin was gentler about this than Barnhouse, but he lacked no conviction about what he was doing. yeah, as you point out, even in the 80s, even on the show, yeah, just very confident, very uber confident. And so as a postmodern, I look at that and I'm like, yeah, but how can you be so confident about these things? Is there any room for self-doubt or humility
Yeah.
in that?
Yeah. I think the one good thing about that kind of confidence is that it brings out defined conversations. It indicates that the person is kind of like, well, hang on, why do you have no room for maybe being wrong? But the conversations that develop from that, like between him and Bill Johnson, where
Yeah.
I think Bill is a great person. I enjoyed my interview with him. I'm not criticizing him at all, but he came in with seemingly not as much confidence as Walter Martin, but because of that conversation, it's produced this incredible amount of dialogue that other people can come in and just look at it.
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad that Walter Martin had that kind of personality. And I want to come to this later. So we're going to stick with Walter Martin back at the Unruh and this initial conversations that happened. But later I want to chat about what he was saying in the 1984 interview, where he's saying, I'm now wondering if these guys misled me on purpose. And I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to say with that, but we'll come back to that a bit later. So back to these conversations that were unfolding at Starbucks with Walter Martin. So they're actually meeting in person and they're having conversations. Take us from there right up to the publishing. Oh, was Zondervan's a publishing company still to this day, I think, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And was Barnhouse, was that his publishing company, or did he have a separate?
No,
thing?
no, it wasn't his publishing company. It was Zondervan was there was a man named Zondervan who was the founder of it, or at least he ran it. I'm not sure when exactly it was founded, but
Right.
no, Barnhouse, was just this well-established pastor, writer, radio personality. He like HMS Richards was kind of in that first or second wave of ministers who got on the radio in the 20s.
Right.
And that was kind of his claim to fame.
Right. And so he distributed via Zondervan.
Yeah, well, Martin worked for Zondervan. He would come and he published with Zondervan, and so this was kind of the preeminent press that you wanted to go through. One of them,
right? When I had a music shop, sold it about 10 years ago, but I had it for 21 years, and I would sell everything you can think of to do with music. And I had a little section of Christian books, and I would order from Zondervan books. So
yeah,
they were still a huge company in the 90s, 2000s.
You know who else had a music store?
Who?
The Andersons.
Really?
Yeah, in North Fitzroy.
What? OK Anderson?
No. So their parents started it. No,
wait. So Roy and OK's parents had a music store.
Yeah. So basically, the Andersons came into the church because of the Brighton camp meeting in 1890. Was it 4? I guess January of 1894 was it?
Right.
And so the Anderson family at that time had this music store that had been started. It was Roy's parents, Roy's father, Roy and OK and Cliff, their father and their uncle were running it. It had been started by Roy's grandparents, I guess, and then they turned it over to their kids, and then they decided to keep the Sabbath. So they said, we're closing the music store on Sabbath, and that caused a lot of trouble.
That's fascinating and explains why OK Anderson came into my music shop all the time. And maybe he even told me that and I've just forgotten. But he would come in and look around, and I remember distinctly thinking he has a real interest in this shop.
Yeah. Well, they were a very musical family. They were a very musical family. And it was Roy would rejoice in the opportunities he had throughout his career, but he held music in very high esteem. I think he actually wanted to be a musician before he had. I know this is not about him, but real quick, they had a life-changing experience during the First World War because his older brother died. He was an Australian pilot, and being a pilot in World War I.
Wow.
Do not Top Gun. You know what I mean?
No. Yeah.
Not Top Gun.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he died, and it was a profound moment for Roy, and he decided.
Roy's brother and OK's brother. And did you say Colin is the third one?
Cliff.
Cliff, I mean, yeah. So
Yeah,
so they had a fourth brother that
Yep.
died.
Yep. Died in World War One. And I don't know if he was shot down in combat or just died in training. I mean, like I
Yeah.
said, those planes,
Yeah. Wow.
it was one or the other. So, but yeah, that was the transformative moment for him that I like I said, I have it in my head that he was going to be a musician professionionally and
Yeah.
switched to being a minister instead. And now we have QOD because of it.
Because of it. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Boy, I love those little side things that don't ever hold back from those interesting little tidbits
Yeah.
of information. So, Walter Martin, what date did he first have an actual face-to-face meeting, and was it with Unruh? And take us from there right up to the printing of the book.
Okay. So they met on March 8th, 1955. That was their first meeting at the General Conference office. And as you can imagine, Martin comes in not a little, like, he has his preconceived ideas of Adventism, and he learned a lot about Adventism from D.M. Canwright and another ex-Adventist, E.B. Jones. And so, he's got all these ex-Adventist criticisms. He's coming armed. If you've seen that Martin video, it's enough to know that he comes prepared and he comes ready to shoot. So, he comes with all of these arguments that he got from these ex-Adventists, and Froome and Reed are able to kind of manage these to a certain extent, saying no, we're misunderstood, these kind of things, especially when it came to the divinity of Christ. That was an area of emphasis. The atonement, the law, the Sabbath, the investigative judgment, LNY, all of these kind of major issues. And on some of them, Froome and Reed were able to point out, like, hey, this isn't really accurate. We're not really anti-Trinitarian, which was true for Froome and probably Reed, I guess. And many other Adventists. It wasn't universally true, but it was true enough. And so that caused Martin to kind of step back a little bit and say, I need to check these assumptions. I need to check what I've heard, and I need to figure this out and get to the bottom of this. So it started out in a very hostile way. Martin's style was described as very rapid fire. Like, what about this? 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 And it was just it was tense and it was confrontational.
I don't suppose any of it was recorded.
Right? That would be amazing.
That
would be amazing. Yeah, I know. If only. So, one of the ways they won Martin's trust there from the start was they let him into the vault. Said, whatever books you want to see, I guess to mix these metaphors now, we're an open book. Come find out whatever it is you want to find out.
In the GC vaults or the White Estate vaults?
Yeah, at the GC. I don't know that there's really was a difference between the two at the time. But I mean, basically, you had access to whatever books you wanted to have access to.
Wow. Did he take them up on that?
Yeah, definitely. And he did. And
how come he didn't stumble across the Andreasen kind of theology when he went looking into those books?
Well, I mean, I think I'm sure they gave him some books that they wanted him to read, and he may have asked for other books that he wanted to consult. But if he wasn't previously aware of Andreasen, no one was going to go make him aware of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, have a look at all the books, and they've taken a little box of some books that they might have just taken home for the weekend.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly what he read, but the gesture impressed him. That again, maybe I need to take a step back here and reevaluate what I think that I know about Adventists and what they believe. And so the second day was much calmer, much calmer. Unruh said, Unruh's narrating this for us later on, but Martin came in and said, I was wrong about Adventists, and I need to go back to the beginning here and learn what you guys really, really believe. And at that moment, Unruh says, he extended his hand in fellowship to the Adventists to shake their hand, which was, I mean, it's just a small gesture in the scheme of things. But for them, like, this was a powerful moment.
Wow.
That maybe things were going to be okay. Again, no idea that there was going to be a book out of this. We're just having a conversation, right?
So at this stage, they're just hoping to not be printed in their next book on cults.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the hope. I'm sure they had a hope beyond that too. Like maybe we can be friends here. There had already been some good relations between Adventists and other evangelicals. It wasn't only Froome and George Cannon here or Barnhouse. There have been other relationships that have been forming. They just didn't really go anywhere.
Right. This is
You know,
since Ellen White's death.
well, I mean, even in the early 1950s, E. Schuyler English is one of them that I think Froome was a friend with. The first editor of Christianity Today, Roy Anderson, wrote some really fantastic letters. They wrote back and forth, very friendly ones. Even a letter to Zondervan, after the end of these conferences, saying, I hope we can have a good relationship going forward. So these conversations open the door for Adventists to other relationships. But even aside from this Martin thing, there was already doors kind of being cracked open a little bit. So there was kind of an incentive here to let's keep pushing this door open. We're tired of cracked doors. Let's lean into this thing.
Yeah.
See where it goes. Right. It doesn't help. It doesn't help that Froome, once Martin became aware that there was differences in Adventism and that some people very much were members of a cult and other Adventists were perfectly evangelical, as how Martin saw it and would always see it. It didn't help. Froome kind of, those guys are part of the lunatic fringe. That was his choice phrase that lived in infamy.
I bet did he regret it saying that?
I don't know if he regretted it, but it was unwise.
Yeah. And it was picked up and lives on to this day.
It was picked up and lives on. I mean, I don't know who came up with the phrase, because we do have a letter from Arthur Maxwell to Froome using the term. And I don't know if Arthur originated it, or maybe that was or maybe Froome had mentioned it to Arthur and Arthur was now kind of throwing it back.
Yeah, okay.
But wherever it came from, it seemed to have been a private way of talking about these more traditional Adventists. And
I also feel like some of the private conversations need to be left private. Like I think about, sometimes post or pre-interview, there's a certain thing, there's a kind of a way people can just talk off record that you could throw in a thing like, the lunatic fringe, but not, you're not really meaning it, but when history, when you look back and study it, sometimes all the private stuff comes out and gets added to the full historical record, and I think it colors the waters from what may have been true intentions sometimes. Anyway, that's a side.
Yeah. Well, look, as somebody who relies on these letters,
I know you'd love stumbling across that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I just think, some of the things I've said off air, if that became part of the public record of SDA&A.
Yeah. Well,
anyway.
I think you bring up a good point. We do have to be careful when we do history of the way we handle people's reputations, and because I would want someone to be careful about handling my private emails.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I had my interview with, and sadly, Ron Numbers passed because we were going to chat again on the program, but he and I just got a mental blank. Thank you. You refresh my memory. Ron Numbers, and we had a great time. I've just literally got a blank.
Jonathan Butler.
Yeah, John Butler. Yeah. And I said, look, we just had this amazing they wanted to have a chat before we actually did the interview. So the day before, we had like an hour or so conversation. And I had at the time a kind of subscription group called Inside Scoop or something like that. And I said, can I post that there as a special thing for those that don't watch the publicly aired one? And they said, look, no, we'd rather you didn't, because it was one of those kind of conversations where we're just laughing and being a bit flippant. But like you say, you want to be careful of how someone edits or uses your own emails historically. But as a historian, those insightful conversations between Arthur and Maxwell and Froome like gold.
They are. And you still need them to help make sense of things, because if you only rely on public statements, like if you
but it's
read
propaganda.
yeah, I mean, it kind of is like,
Yeah.
and I, in the best sense of that often, but propaganda nonetheless. If all you read were the General Conference bulletins to get a sense of Adventist history, then everything is good, and it keeps getting better. Every 5 years, or whatever. Now it's 5 years, but it used to be every year. You'd have no sense. I mean, you could almost just totally ignore that glacier view ever happened if all now that was a little bit different, because there was more of a willingness to publish about controversies in denominational papers in the 80s than it didn't exist before.
Yes.
You just wouldn't. If we're talking about W.W. Fletcher and around 1930, you don't want to publicize this stuff. You don't want to give air to it. So you just kind of ignore it and hope no one notices.
Yeah.
But
that's why I do love Gillian's volumes that she's releasing, because you're getting to look behind the scenes way more.
Yeah.
Okay, back to Walter Martin. Where are we up to?
Hold on, Gillian. I love you, and I really appreciate this work that you're doing, getting these things out there. But when I got all 5 of my volumes, I noticed the first one was significantly smaller than the other 4. And when I put them on my bookshelf, they don't match. So if there's ever a reprint of the first one, can we just make it bigger just to match? It's just a little OCD thing. Yeah.
OCD thing.
I haven't.
And Gillian, make sure it's On the Road to Glacier View on every title.
Yes.
Make sure that. And I think the first 5 are like that, but maybe the 6th one isn't. Keep On the Road to Glacier View.
Yeah, I'm with you, Peter. I think we can work this out between the two of us. We can solve this huge controversy just between us. Anyways, okay.
The great controversy.
I appreciate the books, Gillian. I'm finding them very indispensable.
Amazing. Yeah, I hope she reaches 10 volumes.
Okay, listen, I've got to read all these things in preparation for my episodes on Des. So I got to watch all your 8,000 videos in season 2, and I got to read her 100,000 words on it. Like, have some mercy on me, guys.
And didn't you request that I send you the complete unedited 86 interviews?
Yes, I need that. You want to know why? Because when they're on Facebook and YouTube, they're harder to get a hold of. And if I just had them in video, I could just run them through AI and have it generate a transcript that I could search if I'm looking for particular.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know.
Let's have that conversation. Oh, I've got them all on a hard disk. So I could just drag them across and post them to you.
That's the only reason why I'm here.
It's more the people have said to me. I'll have said to them. I had this chat with Rosalie Power when she was at the Heritage Centre or whatever it's called up there at Avondale, and I said, but they've said to me they don't. Some of them they don't want me to release, and so I'm honouring that. She said, "Don't worry about that. I'll just take them all, and when they're dead, I'll just release them."
Well,
Rose, if you're watching, that may not be word for word. I might be paraphrasing.
I'm only here, Peter. I don't even care about QOD. I only studied this so I could get on your show and ask you.
Knew I loved it.
That's all I'm here for.
It's working. It's working. I'm very close to going right. I'm just going to send you everything.
Keep sending him money, guys, so he can just keep swaying the needle in my favor. I would really appreciate it.
Someone did offer me a lot of money to send them the whole season 2, 86 episodes unedited. I won't say the amount, but it was a lot. And retrospectively, I'm thinking maybe I should have accepted that. But I wondered if they had a hidden agenda of going that I would suddenly have no rights to it, and they'd shelve it. They'd shelve it.
No, it's still yours. I will give you, I don't know how many cans of Big Franks. I'll get you sanitarian food, whatever it is that you want. What's your favorite cereal? I'll get a
Wheat Bix. Wheat Bix is my favorite. Sanitarian.
Wheat Bix. They take, I understand in making it, they take Ellen White's writings and just kind of grind them really fine and put them in. So it keeps
that
you,
explains a lot. Yeah.
It keeps you Adventist.
It keeps me Adventist. Keeps me a regular Adventist.
Yeah, I mean that's why you're here. Look at this. You didn't walk away and go do something else with your life. You're here.
I don't fan the flames of Rodney Smith. Don't fan the flames of Rodney Smith.
That's right. That could be you. Anyways, okay.
Back to Walter Martin.
Yeah, Stripples. Somebody's saying Stripples, please, in the chat. Okay.
What's a stripple?
Stripples like the veggie bacon.
Right.
Listen, come to the States.
I'd love to come to the States.
You
I'd love to live there.
I'll give you so much. You'll die of sodium overdose, but it'll be a good death.
Where do you live, by the way?
I live in Peoria, just south of Chicago.
Right. So
Yeah.
I love Chicago, because I love blues music, and Chicago's the home of the electric blues kind of.
Oh, okay.
Scene. Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, how do you feel about snow?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan.
You're gonna have to change that picture behind you there through the window.
Yeah, that's right. Although that's a real window.
So yeah. Anyways, okay. Well, you're very much invited here, and I'll give you all the veggie meat. There's so much veggie meat now. It's glorious. But anyways, where were we at? Okay, we were talking about
Walter Martin. They've had the second day. They're on the second day. They've shook hands.
And it didn't end there.
Take us from there.
It didn't end there. Okay, so that was the first meeting there. It took place in those 2 days, and it went pretty well there at the end. And so Unruh was elated. He's like, in his mind, if we can turn Martin and Cannon and Barnhouse, like they could be our biggest defenders. And so there's a lot at stake here. So they met again on March 17th, about a week later, and there isn't a whole lot, I think, known about this. They talked about the Day of Atonement and Satan as a scapegoat, which, as you know, is a sticking point. I think I don't know if Miles talked about that when he was on the show, but he talked about that a bit. Anyways, and then they had another meeting in April, a few weeks after that. Now, this time Martin had come up with specific questions he wanted them to answer and reply to. And I don't know if you're a fan of Hamilton, the musical.
I haven't seen it yet, but my wife has, and a bunch of her friends and family loved it. So, but I haven't seen it yet.
Okay. Well, it is, of course, sufficiently American that, you guys might break with the whole Commonwealth thing and down with the king. I don't know, but be careful. Have tea and crumpets before you go in there, just to protect yourself. But the point there is that the subject, Alexander Hamilton, wrote the lion's share of these articles. It became known as the Federalist Papers, and so they kind of they describe him and Hamilton as the question, why do you write like you're running out of time? Like he's just furiously writing all the time. And I feel like Froome was a little bit that way when he's responding to Martin's questions. Of the 24 questions Martin has, Froome wrote the responses to 18 of them, and Reed wrote 8. So I think that adds up. That might be 26, but whatever. It's oh, good. Somebody said a Hamilton restaurant. I'm now in the reference. You're now in my top 3 SDA Q&A interviews. We did it, guys.
Oh, yes. Who said that? Who said that? Oh, yes. Motor Sapien.
Yeah. Well done. Thank you so much for that. I'm not really paying attention to them either, but every once in a while I cross it by.
Yeah, me too. You'll have to tell us what the other 2 are there, Motor Sapien.
Oh, yeah. Who are the other 2? That's odd. And where do I rank in the top 3? I mean, I'm flattered.
We'll soon find out. I can now, with my Restream analytics, it can put them all in order. So I'll give you a ranking after the show, and you'll slowly work your way up.
Yeah.
The top one is the Alan Davis first one I did with him when he left when he talks the interview about leaving Adventism.
Yeah.
But sorry, go on.
Yeah, he's an interesting fellow. I don't get into apologetics, but occasionally I watch these other things and while I'm washing dishes. All right. But anyways, so after the third meeting in April 1955, they went on a break for the summer. This is camp meeting season for the Adventists, and Froome was going to be heading to Europe, and I'm sure the evangelicals had to kind of reconvene. It's like, we've met 3 times. Martin's going back to Barnhouse, like, let's talk about how things are going and what this might mean. And of course, the Adventists are then writing letters back and forth, to each other, to Arthur Maxwell, to Reed, to Froome. Like, they're going back and forth, and they need to talk to the General Conference as well, to kind of coordinate here. Now, Froome during this time does openly lament things that Andreasen has written, thinking that they're very counterproductive, and he's worried. He's worried that Andreasen's writings are going to get in the hands of Martin and Barnhouse.
So say that again. So by now, Andreasen,
so
pre the book coming out, Andreasen's got wind of it.
Yeah.
All right, I didn't know that.
So no, it's not that Andreasen got wind of the book. It's that Froome is concerned that Martin and Barnhouse are going to get a hold of some of Andreasen's books.
Oh, sorry, I've got that round the wrong way.
Yeah, and that it's not gonna go well. And they also realize they need to edit the previous General Conference president's book, Branson's book, because he said that Jesus had a sinful nature.
Yes, that's right. That's a big one I want to come to later.
Yeah,
when it's in the book.
Yeah, and Branson, I mean, to his credit, again, not a conspiracy here, they told Branson about this, and he willingly changed it.
Wow.
So it. This is what Julius Nahm says in his dissertation. Julius Nahm did his dissertation on this, and said that that Branson willingly changed it. Now, Froome and Arthur Maxwell are writing all throughout the summer. Froome was kind of looking forward to meeting some German theologians like Martin Niemöller, and so, if I may, Arthur Maxwell writes, I agree with you entirely that we have too long neglected these distinguished theologians in the other churches, and I am inclined to think that some of our men have been afraid of their superior educational accomplishments, and so on. So, again, there's this mindset that has been developing among these certain Adventists that, why are we afraid of these other theologians? Why do we not try to become friends with them?
And there's also an indication there that they are definitely wanting to kind of hide some things from Walter Martin. So they've got some good intentions. They've got some established connections that are starting to build, and they don't want to break them. And so they're needing to go, hang on, let's try and make sure that Walter Martin doesn't discover these things. And that Arthur Maxwell is Uncle Arthur's Bedtime Stories, Arthur Maxwell, isn't it? Yeah. They wrecked my head when I was a kid, I must say, just as a little aside.
Yeah.
If you break the Sabbath, you're bound to crack your head open on a log under the water in the pond.
Yeah, nothing ages well, and I think we all just have to remind ourselves that nothing that is right is probably going to age well either.
Oh no, I know.
You know what I mean? I think, like, what am I saying now? What am I writing now that in 30, 40, 50 years, people are going to be like, what a monster. Why was he not aware of this? And,
yeah. I look at things just even in the last 3.5 years from this kind of SDA&A platform that I think, oh, wow, did I say that?
Yeah. Carl Wagner, I want to make sure I say this. I see you there in the comments, but not related to anything you've said. But you were mentioning earlier how Adventists aren't in Rise of the Cults in the end of 1955, and I just want to put a pin in that and acknowledge that. I need to look that up. I have it in my notes. I don't know if I got it from the dissertation or not, where I got that from, but I'll double check that. I hear what you're saying. You're saying it's not in your copy. Well, I'll get to the bottom of that.
Oh,
but anyways, so the summer ends. And again, I think there's this, like, the Adventist side of this team is kind of they're in constant contact throughout the summer, and including members outside the team like Arthur Maxwell, and they're coming more and more convinced, more and more convicted that we have, because they've had this success in these first 3 meetings, that why have we not done this earlier? Why have we not tried to reach out and pursue friendly relations with these people? And Unruh at one point said something that could have been written today. We're trying to pound home to the world that Jesus is coming a second time when more and more people don't even believe he came the first time.
Interesting.
Like we need to go back to the basics. They don't even believe in the Bible anymore. And so he's saying like, we have made a mistake by emphasizing all these Adventist distinctives without making sure that the Christian foundation has been there. And, and I think this is how Adventism began. This is how the Millerite movement was. We just assumed that everybody was Christian. And so what we're trying to do is just add like a cherry on top, just trying to add the Sabbath or add the second coming or add this or that. But the assumption was that everybody already knows that you're saved by faith. Everybody already knows that Jesus died for you. Why do we have to say that? And so we didn't. And so you just keep doing that for so many years. And that assumption is less and less true with each passing year. And so you're left just kind of hammering the law and the second coming and all this stuff when people don't even have that relationship with Jesus that maybe they once had, or you presume they once had. And so, there's this growing awareness of this mistake. Froome, of course, puts it really well in Movement of Destiny that I read earlier. Unruh was saying the same thing. Like, we're making a mistake here by not emphasizing Christ in everything that we do. And I can't imagine a later Adventist teacher who would come along and say something very similar to that. But, anyway, so what happened in August, they had the fourth meeting in August of 1955. And this time, Barnhouse wanted to join the discussion and hear for himself. He heard Martin and Cannon say that, things are going really well. And we were wrong about some of these assumptions. And Barnhouse kind of like, well, I want to hear it for myself. And so Barnhouse invited them. By this point, Roy Anderson is coming on board, and they were all invited to Barnhouse's house, the Barnhouse house. And
the Barnhouse barn.
Yeah, there we go. The Barnhouse barn. So, Barnhouse, a man of his stature, I'm guessing, is not going to go to the General Conference building. You're going to come to him. So, Froome apparently, in some of his letters, makes it known that he wanted Anderson over Reed from the very beginning, but he dealt with Reed. Because I think he thought that Roy, as I said, was more diplomatic and was able to he wasn't a dyed-in-the-wool administrator, whatnot. He was, he was an experienced evangelist and all this kind of stuff. So on August 22nd here, Martin met with the Adventists. They began planning their trip to the barn houses. In fact, what's really funny about this is that Martin was a little short on money, and he asked the Adventists to give him money for his plane ticket and that he would reimburse them.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. It cost $82.20, just in case you're wondering how much it costs.
I like that kind of info. So he flew down.
He flew down, and so, wow. And then Froome, Unruh, Reed, and Anderson made their way as well. This was in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, just north of Philadelphia. And so anyways, and they met together. They, Barnhouse, kind of like his 1953 New Year's Eve or New Year's article, he opened by saying, I hope we can find understanding here together. I hope we can pray together. He wanted a good outcome here. He wasn't looking for a fight. But he also didn't pull any punches in these meetings. He referred to some Adventists, instead of lunatic fringe, he called them ignorant fanatics, which, again, you're not winning anybody. Like, nobody who's called an ignorant fanatic is going to say, oh, yeah, you know what? You're right. My bad.
Yeah. It's almost like he's a clickbaiter.
Yeah, right? Oh, gosh. Can you imagine Barnhouse in the YouTube comments?
Oh, imagine his thumbnails.
Yeah, right. It's like Ellen White, spawn of Satan. It doesn't sound too dissimilar from some of the critics out there now.
Yeah.
But the spirit of Barnhouse lives. But anyway, so he made it clear. Again, this is not some syncretism going on here where it's like, well, you have your truth and we have our truth and all truth is truth. It wasn't like this touchy-feely kind of thing. Barnhouse laid it out. Here's where I disagree with you. Here are the questions I have. And at the end of the day, still disagreed with them on important fundamental things like the Sabbath. But nevertheless, by the end of it, this is, it centered at first. The first day centered around Froome's prophetic faith of our fathers. which Froome was very happy to talk about because it's your own book and you're you're able to have home field advantage there a little bit. And anyway, so they had a really good conversation, and at the end of it, Barnhouse was very willing to concede that these Adventists were fellow Christians.
So Barnhouse was willing to concede. I kind of felt that Walter Martin was, but that Barnhouse was a bit reluctant to concede. But you're saying that no, he was quite happy to concede that they. How did you word that? Concede that.
Yeah, that he could consider Adventists to be fellow Christians.
Right, that's big.
Yeah. And so this was, in fact, at one point, an Ellen White quote was Roy Anderson brought up an Ellen White quote to Barnhouse, and Barnhouse liked it so much that he called his secretary in to come copy it for him. And
you know what the quote was?
Yeah, I do. I won't read the whole thing, but the gist of it is, we should come to the investigation of God's word with a contrite heart, a teachable and prayerful spirit. We should not study the Bible for the purpose of sustaining our preconceived opinions, but with the single object of learning what God has said. And so he says, she goes, we cannot hold that a position once taken, an idea once advocated, is not under any circumstances to be relinquished. There is but one who is infallible, he who is the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah. And what a powerful statement, comment, whatever you call it, which in many ways fueled Des Ford's feeling that, I'm allowed to present these things because Ellen White is giving full approval to, hey, let's look at this stuff. Let's not be afraid to change our minds if we're wrong.
Yeah. I mean, and I think nobody would deny that in theory.
No.
But when you're coming to actually apply it,
which, post Glacier View, we found out theory, sure. Actually do it. Sorry, Des. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'll get into that when I get into that with my episode.
Yes.
I'm not going to comment on Des now, but so anyways, it went it went really well. Froome wrote of Walter Martin after the Barnhouse visit, said he has unusual gifts for a man of his age, and it means that Walter Martin is young. We have learned to love him as a brother in the Lord. And, Froome went on to say that he hopes for a new day may come in our mutual witness before the Lord. So he's coming to see Martin as, like we're on the same team here. We're both trying to witness for Jesus.
And what year is this now?
This is the summer of 1955.
That's still 55, yeah.
Yeah, this is right after their meeting at
so there's a lot of excitement going on there. It's almost like, sorry to keep referring to Glacier View and Ford, but that moment that the consensus statement was voted on and agreed upon, and the majority were happy to go along with it, and Ford as well. When I interviewed Bill Johnson, he was almost in tears, remembering how excited they were. Yeah. And I'm sure that the Froome group were equally excited. Wow, we're not in the book. We're going to actually extend the connection between us and the body of Christ.
Yeah. I mean, it was a noble goal, and it still is I think a noble goal. I mean, I don't think anybody can look at the state of Christianity and say, yeah, that's how it should be.
Yeah. And that's perhaps what Barnhouse, when he read Ellen White's quote there, saw the significance of that as if to mean, we all need to have self-reflection, and it's a good whether she wrote it or not, but attributed to her.
Yeah.
It's a fine thing to say and to keep in mind.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, it's always going to come down to the application of these principles.
Yeah. And is that something that also defines the traditional Adventist and the progressive Adventist? The progressive is open to new light and to perhaps move forward, but maintaining whatever.
Well, everybody's going to say that they're open to new light.
But would Andreessen have said that?
Sure, I'm sure he would have.
Yeah. Okay. So the application. This is interesting. Yeah. I'm glad that you said what you said, because it's the application. So the intention can be good, but it's what's happening with the application of it. And the progressive tends to apply some of these, the ability to put that sentiment into action, and so perhaps generally speaking, the traditional Adventist has the same sentiment, but seems to be less likely to apply changes.
Well, I mean, it's just about where you want to apply these changes. I feel like that's kind of what's going to distinguish some of these different groups in Adventism. Well, we think that this statement about not being stuck in the mud and being more open-minded, we think that should apply to our relations with other Christians. Okay, well, that's going to define this group. Others are going to say, well, I think it should reflect our understanding of the gospel and rethinking the investigative judgment. Okay, that's going to define another group, right? Like where you're applying this principle is going to come to define different groups.
That's a really good point.
I don't know that there's a Christian alive who's going to disagree with the sentiment, with the value of what Ellen White wrote there. But what beliefs can be revisited and what beliefs can't is always going to be the sticking point, right?
I've discovered that few people apply change, and they'll say, "Yeah, show me the evidence, and I'll change my mind." I've found that some people, you even supply the empirical data, and they will still go, "Yeah, that hasn't really changed my mind." And I'm not saying that I'm not like that either. I'm just saying it seems to be a human condition to almost double down. Like there's been a study I read about a little while ago. I should try and find it if I want to make a claim to having read it. But it was saying that anecdotal evidence sways people more than empirical data.
Oh, certainly is true. But I mean, do you ever like do something and you've done it this way for years or whatever, and then you think, wait, there's a better way to do this. Why did I never like question how I did this or what I thought about this? I think because we can't be in deconstructive mode all the time in every area of life. Like you got to just take certain things because mom and dad said it. I've got to believe it because it's the only way to live. You can't question everything.
No, well, we're wired to almost have to just take what is said as for granted and pursue that path, because if everyone was just deconstructing all the time and questioning all the time, there'd be no progress at all.
There would be no progress. Well, Isn't
that ironic?
Yeah. They might call it progress because they've torn down their house and they've dug a hole, from my part of the world halfway to China. And if that looks like progress to them, fine, but it really isn't useful progress.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anybody else?
But the irony of like, I'm a deconstructionist. I ask why for everything. But that doesn't, that often has being less deconstructionist and a little bit more just, okay, I'm just going to believe what I've been told, can sometimes bring about more construction. Can have more benefit. So it's an interesting thing you raised there. I'm glad you did, because that's something to ponder when you look at all these things.
I don't think it's an issue of we either got to be a sheep and just follow along.
Exactly. You got to find the balance.
You got to find the balance, but it's like the deconstruction itself has to be in service of a larger goal. Like I want to see a healthier church, a more vibrant faith, whatever it is that you're like. I'm deconstructing in order to have that. I'm not tearing down because I see weaknesses and I see logical fallacies, because you can just do that all day long. We're all human.
Yeah.
You're going to find flaws in everybody's arguments about everything, and you can feel superior to everybody else because you see their flaws. But at the end of the day, what are you building? By you tear down something in a bad neighborhood, a condemned building, maybe. The whole purpose of tearing it down is so that you can build something better in its place.
Yeah. And I find that with me personally as well. If I'm deconstructing myself, of course, I'm not trying to deconstruct me to a mess of nothingness. My goal is to deconstruct so I can try and be a better person, and that's how I'm approaching this. And I think you as well. Like, it's not about tearing down Adventism. That any deconstruction or analysis is laid out so people can make their own lives better, make the church better. Some people can leave, some people can stay. And later on, I'm interested in chatting about your own ability to stay within it. And I think you've found a really happy place with how you've worked it out. So there's no judgment there. Someone else might leave, someone else might stay, but you do have to, when you do stay, I think it's important to stay because you know who you really are. You're true to yourself.
Yeah. At some point, you got to own your own choices, and you can't stay because you grew up here, or mom and dad did it, or I live in
Exactly.
Loma Linda area, or wherever. You got to have your own reasons for staying or your own reasons for leaving. And one of the things I appreciate about SDA Q&A, Peter, with many of your guests, is I feel like you're having the conversations we should have been having all along. And ironically, maybe less people would have left the church if we would have been having these conversations all along.
Exactly. Like, people just want to feel heard.
Yeah.
And I think the great thing about social media, like when I stumbled across your podcast, I remember thinking, wow, this stuff was just never talked about. And yes, it's a part of the history. So talking about it, I think, is really important for creating the dialogue.
Yeah. It is. Just jumping ahead to more modern times, what's funny is, like, you still see this basic framework of these Adventist evangelical conferences alive today, where you have Adventists who don't want anything to do with these other churches, and you have other churches who want nothing to do with Adventists, who want to call us cult, and it's just kind of like it's like we've been stuck in this cycle ever since.
Yes. That's what I was saying yesterday to Kevin, that from the outside looking in, that seems even more pronounced.
Yeah.
Like, for us, when I was an Adventist inside this, and I'd have great discussions behind the scenes with people about it, it felt like, there was a loop, but it felt like there was some way of being able to manage it or break it. Whereas people looking in from the outside just see confusion. And a lot of people I just talk to, and I don't steer them this way, but they go, well, they do see it as a lunatic fringe. They don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And so having open dialogue, I think, leads to less like, oh, this is crazy, we're just talking.
Yeah. And I feel like we kind of have a similar cause here, I think, with my podcast. I want to have these conversations because I think they matter, but also because I don't want to keep repeating. It's not repeating, but I don't want to keep having these same kind of dynamics at work.
Yeah.
Where it's almost like every generation's having the same conversation all over again.
Exactly. I'm an observer, and even from a young age, and I remember hitting about 15, 16, thinking, hang on, I've been here before. And then in my 30s, hang on, I've been here before. And then another 20 years, hang on, and people, when I did my season 2 on Glacier View, why are you rehashing this stuff? Because it's never been talked about in this kind of way. It's always been propaganda or suppression, or so I think it's a unique thing that to talk about it, and it won't. And like you said, it's going to keep on looping until people do talk about it. And what I'm finding, and I don't know if you find this too, but I can get people to talk on the program about divergent thought from both sides, but I cannot get the leadership to talk about it. And I think it's going to keep on going until they do come on these kind of shows.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know how much conversation it will take to make progress on some of these issues, but it may take, I don't know what needs to happen. But to me, history is therapy. And
I like it, yeah.
So I think what we need is not to come to the right idea necessarily. It's to have therapy, because in a sense, we're all influenced by what our kind of our spiritual parents have done. Like our Adam and Eve is James and Ellen White and Joseph Bates and William Miller. Like, we're all influenced by that. We grew up or converted to a culture that was shaped by those people and the decisions they made, and whether we are aware of it or not. Some people are like, well, I don't like Adventist history. And it's like, it doesn't matter. That's like saying I don't want to know my family history. It doesn't matter if you want to know it or not. You're still shaped by it. You're still, maybe you're prone to alcoholism because of your parents or grandparents, or maybe you're going to go bald because of somebody in your house, in your family tree. So if that's the case, why not learn about it?
Yeah.
because it's already shaping you. Why not figure out what is shaping you and why it's doing it? And then you can act intelligently about, do I want to continue to be shaped by this? Do I want to change that or whatnot?
Yeah.
All right.
So back to where we're up to. They've had the handshakes. They're feeling good. Barnhouse has said, "Oh, yep, you guys are part of the general broader Christian body." What happened next?
Yeah.
How did it go from that to the book?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll move a little bit faster through this because I have a bedtime, and
don't worry about that. You just go to bed late. Yeah.
Okay.
Step out of reality.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so
what we might be able to do if you're open to it, because so next week we've got on Wednesday James Wagner coming back on. Have I said that right?
Carl?
No, Jim.
Oh,
James.
Jim.
That was the lawyer for Walter Ray. He's coming back on next week on the Wednesday, Tuesday, your time. Yep. The person that was going to be on the Thursday is pushed a couple of weeks forward. Could we do part 2 this time next week? Because I want to go from the QOD to 1980.
Yeah,
I want to see some of that. Let's see how we go.
We can definitely do that. I will. I'll be at the general conference building.
Ooh,
so you want me to do it from the lobby?
That would be awesome. And Ted Wilson walks by.
Yeah, I'll just do it right by his office. I'll just be in the little lobby area outside of his office.
Teasing me.
And maybe he'll drop in for a chat. And he'll say, "Peter, I've watched all your episodes. I love it."
I have a relative that is very good friends with his wife.
Yeah.
And whenever he comes over here, they stay there. And I said to her, "Can you ask him when he was here this last time if he'd come on the program?" So I know for sure that she asked his wife, and he declined. But very, very respectfully. Just it wasn't like I hate your guts.
No, nothing like that. But you know, he did go on one podcast. So
say that again.
He did go on one podcast seeking what they sought. He went on that podcast. It's done by some West Coast, our West Coast Adventists. And anyways, they interviewed him. I don't think he knew what he was getting into with them, but they treated him very nicely, as it often is. You know, you say all sorts of things, and then when you get somebody on your program, you're not there to flame them. You're there to have a conversation.
Yeah. And I think this notion of therapy, doing history for therapy, is great. And I have chatted to, I won't mention names just in case they wouldn't be happy with that, but high-level SPD and union leaders from here, conference, union, division, behind the scenes, in-depth conversations about this show and what we've talked about. So they've had therapy. But when I say, can you do it publicly, because that's really going to help the therapy for you and the audience, that's when they decline.
You know, it's a hard ask. I totally get it. I think when you're aware of you're aware of some flavors of Pew Adventism, you know, at the grassroots level, and how they would respond to such things. Is it worth the headache? Is doing this show worth having 100 emails tomorrow that are angry with you and want you to quit?
And you're in an interesting position where you're just doing the history. You're not making a claim so much, even though you have your thoughts and opinions. You can get away with saying to someone, I'm going on that show because I'm presenting facts, what people do with them. Whereas the other guys, if I said to them, what do you think about women's ordination personally, then they'd go, oh, I can't really answer that.
Yeah. I mean, I have opinions, as you know, about all of these things. I'm not like trying to be.
Oh, that's what I love about your show, is that you're not just going, here's the facts.
Right, but you know
what I mean is, if someone's criticizing you, you can say, "Well, I'm a historian."
Yeah, that's what we hide behind. I'm allergic to being an ideologue. I think anybody who's using history to win an argument, certainly to have a conversation, to submit facts as part of a conversation is fine. But like, if I'm reaching in the Adventist history to prove that my tribe is right and your tribe is wrong, that just seems so boring.
Yeah.
You know, I can't, certainly I don't want to judge everybody who leaves the Adventist church the same way. But I mean, like, for some people, like, their whole ministry is, for the rest of their life, is to blast Adventists. And I know they're looking at it like, oh, I'm trying to warn people and all of this. And I get that. I'm just thinking to myself, if I leave the Adventist church, it's time to have fun, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that's
I like what you said there too, that you're not wanting to use history as to win an argument. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not fun to me. I don't find that enjoyable. I like I said, I think I never really wanted to get into Adventist history. I never really cared about it because the only people around me who ever did Adventist history were, what do you think about the nature of Christ? And here's 8,000 A.T. Jones, Ellen White, whatever quotes, and here's some from the other side, and somebody else. And it's like, I don't want to get in the middle of this because, like, what do you win in this? All you walk away with, if you quote unquote win, is a smug sense of superiority.
Exactly. The greatest advice my dad ever gave me, and I've had to follow learning things from him by watching, not by him sitting down and teaching me stuff. He's just turned 91, incredible guy, healthy, still IQ over 150, amazing guy. But the one thing he said to me very young was, Pete, the more you know, the more you don't know. And I wear that to this day because I'm always learning something new, and I hate the idea of making a pious, higher moral ground claim because you might actually regret saying something.
I think that if there's a danger in the past, it was this kind of overconfidence. If there's a danger in the present, maybe we tend to go to the point of like not having any real convictions, like we're afraid to put our foot down somewhere for fear that we might be wrong or we're going to get blasted on social media for it or something. But like there's got to, we do need to have convictions about things, and I certainly do. I guess I don't want to do this kind of public performance of history as something to serve an ideology. I think history is really interesting in its own right. And it's more interesting when it's not weaponized.
Yes, I like that. Yeah. And having a conviction is different to a pious, higher moral ground as well,
Yeah. 100% it is. So, to me, it's I don't know. We get enough grief on social media. There's enough arguing going on everywhere that I think, to me, the idea of history as therapy appeals to me because it's like, I just want to understand why things are the way that they are, why I am the way that I am, why you are. And because I think that's far more interesting and actually more helpful to living the kind of life I think Jesus wants us to live than fighting.
I 100%. Again, another thing that I try and do with this platform is that we have diverse views, but that we could still go and enjoy coffee or decaf or whatever, hot chocolate.
No, we're going to Starbucks. We're going to go to the same Starbucks that Unruh and Barnhouse we're going to go to.
I love it. Yes, please. and like I often mention, I've got a little business right on the shores of Lake Macquarie in a little town called Toronto, not Canada, and I'm there 3-4 times a week at the cafes. There's 5 or 6 cafes near my little business, and I'm like at literally 30 second from looking at the beautiful lake and a stone's throw from 5 or 6 cafes. I'm often there chatting to people that I've either interviewed here or that I know in the area, and 3-4 times a week. I just love that idea that we might have different views, but in the life living part of it, you don't have to have a belief system to enjoy coffee together.
No, and that's why I love you Aussies. You guys have produced the best heretics for the Adventist Church. I mean, really, just the best quality. Like, they're certainly the more likable heretics. Let's just put it that way. Well, like Canwright, I'm not. How could I go get a coffee with Canwright? I just don't feel like it. It would be. I think it'd be very tense. But I could sit down with you.
Yeah. You think Canwright's going to be too black and white on you, is he?
Yeah, especially later on, it kind of got a little personal in things at times as well. But I think so. I don't know. Some of the folks on the show, like, I don't know if I could have a coffee with them. They seem really kind of like, this is super important.
Yeah.
but the Aussies in general are pretty laid back folks, and in general, I think
they're able to switch between the two. You can have a real feisty conversation, and the next day, it's have a coffee.
Let's have a coffee. Yeah, I'm up for that. And I think I just want to apologize for the fact that Adventism originating in New England and then kind of that frontier of Western America, we've kind of exported some of our anxieties with our missionaries, I feel.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, gosh, when your life expectancy was like 18 minutes back then, every moment was urgent, and you can't afford to have fun. You gotta focus on Jesus, right?
The Lord's coming back any minute.
And on top of that, the Lord's coming back any minute. So there's no room for chilling. But here we are. Anyways.
So here's the suggestion. Let's spend 20 minutes just bringing from that moment of exhilaration that they're now Barnhouse accepting them into the fold to the printing of the book, how it came out. And then if you're okay with it, same time next week, part 2, where we discuss what happened as the book came out and the explosion that hit the Andreessen, Froome. If you're okay with that, and that means you get to go to bed reasonably early. What time is it there now for you?
It's 10 o'clock p.m., Peter.
Oh, that's late for a historian.
Well, I got a lot of dreaming to do. The thing is I have small children and small dogs, and they take turns waking up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, look, I'm with you. I've got 2 young daughters and 2 little puppy dogs. Yeah. And they seem to be jumping on me all the time.
Yeah. It's like there's no respect.
Yeah.
But
my wife's the same. It's impossible to sleep in the Dixon household.
Yeah. So
and I'm a night owl. Like last night, I was like the night before 4 o'clock. Last night was 3 or 4. Anyway, sorry for digressing.
So let's tentatively then we'll do 20 more minutes here, and we'll aim for next week. I'll be in a hotel because it'll be 8:30 local time next week. So I won't be at the GC, but I'll be at the hotel.
That'll be fine.
I'll aim for it. I have no idea what the Wi-Fi situation is going to be there.
Yeah, but let's aim for it, and if not, I'll have a backup ready to go.
All right,
I'll do a reaction video to something.
Cool. There's plenty of things to react to out there.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Okay.
You could do some old Standish, the Standish brothers audio. There's all floating around YouTube. You can react to that. Yeah. They were not happy with QOD. We'll get to that.
Not at all. Well, they were part of the signed CBs. They were the engine room in some ways.
You know what? I find myself listening to some of these people, and they have such conviction that I think, I'm with you guys. And then I think, what are we talking about? Oh, wait, no, I'm not with you guys.
Yeah, I feel that often. Yeah,
but it's so compelling. Like I get people believe it. I get it.
Yeah, that guy Herb. There's an interview with the Standish brothers and Herb Armstrong, and it's a bit of a series. And boy, by the end of it, you're almost signing up to become a real dyed-in-the-wool fundamentalist Adventist eating corn every day.
I mean, even B.G. Wilkinson talking about the Bible translations. He was at the university, and he said, I walked into a class and it was an Adventist Jesuit who was teaching the class, and he kind of goes into these details, and you're like, wow. Then you think, wait a minute, what?
I know
this. What are you talking about? How would you? But he's so convicted, so sure, and the stakes seem so high.
I know.
Anyways,
they're very skilled communicators.
Yeah,
like Doug Batchelor is a very skilled communicator.
Right, and when you talk about the conversation around some of these subjects, but take Bible translations for instance, it's so easy to say the King James is the one translation everyone should be using, and these others are imperfect. It's a conspiracy by the Counter-Reformation against you. Like, what do you say in response to that? Well, okay, there's these different manuscript families, and some of them are older than others, and here's the history,
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, that's boring. It's boring.
Yeah.
Anyways, okay. Yeah. So after the meeting with Barnhouse at the Barnhouse House or the Barnhouse Barn, it sounds like a great children's book. Can we get working on that? Somebody in the comments? Let's work on that children's book about the Adventist evangelical conferences. Okay. They, in the fall, you had to check in with headquarters at some point. you had to check in with headquarters. And so you kind of had a basic framework of agreement on up to a point here. And so, what are these core issues of Christianity, and do Adventists, agree enough? There was a ton of small issues, a ton of other issues that had to be adjudicated at some point. Martin and Cannon didn't like the Ellen White statement that eating meat, she called it doubly objectionable. It wasn't merely objectionable, it was doubly objectionable. So, but it was a kind of a minor thing. You guys can still be Christians and have a weird lady as your founder. But they wanted to do Adventists look down on people who eat meat? They were upset. They did eventually find Andreasen and what he had written about the nature of Christ. But nevertheless, enough progress had been made that it's time to go talk to denominational leaders. And so they looked over a document that Froome and company had prepared in September and October 1955, and they gave it their imprimatur. They said that this is good. The General Conference president, Figure, added a note that saying that the document carefully avoided the suggestion that any new point of faith was being established. In other words, this was a concern. Are we adding some new ideas here? And Figure said, nope. This is what we believe.
I do want to chat about that next week. If you think there were some changes, but we'll leave that to next week.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So anyways, the church leaders did want Froome to add a statement explaining that that Adventists were not monolithic, that there was a diversity of thought in Adventism. I think that they were concerned, as rightly as it turned out, that if you portray all Adventists as believing what Questions on Doctrine ultimately said, then you're going to find out very quickly that not all Adventists believe that. Maybe not even a majority of Adventists believe that. And so, there was there was an awareness, though, that there were different ways of looking at the nature of Christ, and in all of this. And it was understanding that this emerged because Adventism emerged from a diverse place. They were all premillennialists, but not all of them were Trinitarian. The majority of early Adventists were Arminian, but some were Calvinists. We had some Calvinist early Adventists. Some insisted on baptism by immersion. Others were fine with sprinkling. And there was some diversity of opinion on these things for a little while. Throughout the 1940s, even into the 1840s into the 1850s. There was a remarkable conversation about, all of these things that we could take positions on. And there was a lot of tolerance. You could be on this side or that side, and it didn't really matter. And so that, that kind of DNA, like I said, Adventism is a coalition. It's not a monolith. And there was, these differences, even though some of them got hammered out. We're doing baptism by immersion. Others remained. They weren't seen as really that big of a deal. And Adventist leaders thought we should acknowledge this. And this could do two things for us. It could prevent Martin from thinking we're being duplicitous when he finds out that plenty of other Adventists think otherwise. And it would prevent our own people from thinking we're being duplicitous when we show that we acknowledge that, what they believe as well. But Froome did not want to see it necessarily as we have some differences of opinion. He wanted to see that that Adventism itself was evolving. It was progressing. And some were on the train going forward and others were not. And, that's just frankly how he saw it. You're either moving forward in Adventism and embracing all these things, or you're left behind. And obviously that attitude is going to tick people off. Obviously people don't want to be thought of that way. And so if you were Andreasen or somebody like him, your natural reaction is, well, I don't think you're going anywhere. I'm going to put the brakes on your train, and you're not progressing. You're regressing. We're the ones who are right, and you're going backwards. You're going towards the enemy camp there, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Anyways, towards the end of 1955, There was a Congress on Bible prophecy, and so some Adventists attended. We've been attending these things since the late 1800s, off and on. We'd send representatives unofficially and whatnot since the Niagara Bible Conference in the late 1800s. And so now in the 1950s, these are often evangelical meetings. They would gather together, they'd hear speakers, they'd be talking about current events and Bible prophecy. And of course, if those two things are being talked about, Adventists are going to be there, right? And so there were some big evangelical names there, and Adventists showed up as well. And there we find some of the resistance. Martin was experiencing some blowback as well from some of the evangelicals who were getting wind of what he was doing. And
Hey, there's a story where he lost a lot of subscribers to a newsletter or something that he put out as well.
Yeah, that was Eternity Magazine. They said they lost about a third of their subscribers after they embraced Adventists.
And
even
pre-1957, that happened.
Yeah, before QOD. So after these Adventist evangelical conferences, both sides said, we're going to start publishing stuff about this. And Eternity Magazine went first, and I think it was September 1956. And so they published the first of a series of articles explaining why they think Adventists are Christians. And that's what really caused a serious blowback for their subscribers, but they got them back within a few years, and there's some speculation that it was really a bunch of Adventists who now subscribe to Eternity.
Yes.
So I don't know if that's true or
right,
whatever.
possibly.
Yeah, it didn't do a whole lot of long-term damage at all. But anyways, so Walter Martin was there at this Congress on Bible Prophecy in 1955 as well, and they kind of had some more conversation about how their meetings were going. And anyways, Lewis Talbot was at Biola, the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, very, very staunchly fundamentalist institution back then. And Lewis Talbot had caught wind of what Martin is doing. And I don't know if there's some professional rivalry there. Talbot wanted Martin's crown as the king of the cult hunters. But he was just vicious. Just vicious. I mean, they were within like 15 minutes of them running into each other. They were yelling at each other. And, Martin wasn't one to back down either. And at one point, Martin was just exasperated, and he had to tell Talbot, I'm not a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm a Baptist pastor. I'm just doing research on these people. Because he was trying to explain, you're getting Adventists wrong, Talbot. You don't understand them. And so, you kind of get put in this position where he's defending Adventists. And, he had to stop and be like, look, I'm not an Adventist. I'm just telling you what I found, right? I'm the one who showed up. I'm the one who did research there. I'm the one who talked to them. I know what I'm talking about, right? And so anyways, it was really spicy. It was really spicy. But anyways, Froome and Talbot actually ran into each other there as well. And they had a little tense conversation also. But in the end, Talbot said, hey, the next time you're in LA, won't you come stop by? Now, I have no idea if that ever happened or how long that olive branch lasted. But or whether he fully meant it. I don't know.
Did Talbot go on to, and we can perhaps discuss this next week, if he went on to kind of be a player as influential as Martin was, and even went on to Ankerberg or anything like that? Is there some public stuff that he's done?
I don't know if he went on to Ankerberg, but he was editing his paper called The King's Business. So, like I said, I don't know for sure, but I wonder if there's some professional rivalry here. If Eternity loses a bunch of subscribers, are we going to gain them? It's kind of like he wanted to occupy the position that Martin once had, this anti-Adventist position. Now that Martin has gone to accept Adventist, I can take his spot and be that voice.
Right.
And so he relished it. And it was almost like a competition between Barnhouse and Talbot and these other people to just offer the most fiery invective that they could possibly hurl. You couldn't do enough. You couldn't just say, I disagree with them. You had to just heap it on them. And so they did. But even at this point, Bernie Zondervan, that was his name, he was running Zondervan at the time, he wrote to Roy Allen Anderson, and he said, "You may be sure that we, too, are interested in having Martin treat your wonderful group as brethren in the Lord," which was a huge deal because Zondervan had been one of the biggest presses of anti-Adventist literature up until this point.
Wow, that is big.
And so it's like, this is a big turnaround, So, I'll end with this little bit of tension. The reason why I bring up this Bible prophecy conference is because it was a place for some politicking. Martin was going around trying to find fellow evangelicals, telling them about the conversations and trying to kind of recruit them to come alongside him. I'm sure Talbot was doing the same thing. The Adventists, of course, were going around. They wanted to be seen. Here we are. We're one of you. And all of that. But meanwhile, Arthur Maxwell suggests to Froome that we need a board of censors in the Adventist Church to approve what gets published to make sure we don't have any more problematic things leaking out.
Oh boy! Imagine if that had eventuated.
Yeah, they might have called them compliance committees. I don't know. But it is
one thing about your series on QOD. Let me bring it up. We're talking today, of course, to Pastor Matthew J. Lucio, founder of Adventist History Podcast. One thing I realized from listening to that particular series in your big extended history podcast is that the compliance document now with the Ted Wilson faction, the more traditional Adventist view, they want to monitor what goes out, but equally did the more progressive Adventists wanted to monitor. So both sides, what came across to me clearly by listening to your presentation, both sides have the ability to want to control the masses.
Yeah. That's in all of us. As Martin Luther once said, I'm not as worried about the Pope in Rome. I'm worried about the Pope in here.
Yes. Good.
And, and it's always there. And you know what? Everybody who wants to do it means absolutely well. Froome meant well. I mean, it was Arthur Maxwell's idea, but Arthur Maxwell meant well. It was just, we want to have a consistent message. We don't want to be saying, Jesus had a sinful nature. Jesus didn't have a sinful nature. Let's speak with one voice. And, it makes perfect sense. But,
and Ted Wilson's the same. Ted Wilson's, he's wanting to protect a message. Yeah.
So, everybody means well, but it still should send off some red flags because of how these things have tended to go and how human nature is. But anyways, there was an anxiety at this point. Froome wrote to Unruh, speaking of Martin and Barnhouse, he says, I just feel exceedingly concerned that we do not play double, or that we do not allow these statements to continue unrepudiated, or Martin will have just cause to think that we are trifling with him. We must be true to these men. Let's not allow this thing to break down, to backfire, or to play false, or our latter end will be worse than our former. So, it's I say in the episode, do you feel the pressure that Froome felt at that moment? Because, I mean, what an impossible situation. Because you want to clamp down on these contrary things, contrary to what Froome believed, right, that are being published in Adventist press. But at the same time, you can't overtly clamp down on these things because then it looks like you're trying to bend the direction of the church to your will.
Yes. Yeah.
And so but he's realizing, I think very accurately, if Martin and Barnhouse walk away from this, especially now that they've made their opinions public, that Adventists are Christians, if they think that we're just screwing around with them, and we're lying to them, and we're being duplicitous, it is going to go horrible for us. Horrible. It would have been better if we never would have been talking to begin with, right? And so he's aware of the tensions. It's not like, I mean, QOD, the reaction to QOD is going to be, I think the intensity of it is a surprise, perhaps. But everybody is fully aware of the issues involved in what they're doing and the ways in which it could go very, very, very badly.
Yes.
And I feel like that's a good cliffhanger to end on.
It's a good cliffhanger. It's almost like the end of the 1919 conference where they're like, we're worried about which way it could go.
Yeah.
This QOD conversation, they got to this point where they were worried about where it could go. Just out of interest, when did Froome, Unruh, Reid, and Anderson die? Do you know?
Anderson died 1985. He had a file on Des Ford. He paid attention to it. He was his comrade, fellow countryman. But obviously he was of advanced age, so he didn't really take part in that at all. Froome died, I want to say 1974. Unruh, I don't know. I had to Google it. Unruh wrote an article about this in the 70s. But I don't think any of them outlived Anderson. We'll just put it that way.
Right, yeah. And so when we watch, and let's plan this cliffhanger to go next week if possible. If not, I've got EJ Thunder. He can fill in, and maybe you could do the week after if next week can't work. But the cliffhanger I want to talk about. Yeah, they're sitting there going, "Oh, if this goes pear-shaped, it's going to be even worse for us." And then go up to the Ankerberg interview 84, where, sorry, not the 84 one, the one with, sorry, it is that one with Bill Johnson and Walter Martin, where Walter is obviously starting to say, "Well, was I?" And
yeah, kind of ominous there, wasn't it?
And I chatted to, again, mental blank, the guy that was his kind of protege.
Martin's protege?
Yeah, he often watches the show, so I apologize for forgetting.
Oh.
I did it. He's in the second season.
Oh, wow. If only I had all those videos from the second season, I probably could have gone through them all by now and answered this question.
I've thought of a workaround how we can make it happen. I'll chat to you about it after we finish. So yeah, I've got a little contract to run past you idea.
All right, I learned all this QOD stuff for a good reason.
It's for a reason. And remember, we do want to also get you on with Bob Brinsmead as well. I've been trying to make that happen. Gillian, if you're still watching, can you help us make that happen?
I'll buy fruit. I'll buy whatever fruit.
Yeah, tropical. Is it called Tropical Land or something like that? Yeah. And a few of us are talking about doing a road trip where we go and actually hang out with him for a weekend and video an interview with him. And you're welcome to come to Australia, fly into the Gold Coast. We'll drive down. I'll meet you there, pick you up at the airport, and we'll have the weekend with Bob Brinsmead.
I want to do a road trip. I want to do a road trip with you and Bob Brinsmead. I think that'd be a blast. By the way, before we go, you know about this car ride that they're going to do around Australia, right? In 2025.
You're going to?
No. I don't remember exactly who all is involved, but as I understand it, basically the first time a car ride went around the coast of Australia was two Avernus colporteurs in 1925.
I did not know this.
So some folks bought the exact model of car. They're restoring it now, and they're going to take this trip around the coast of Australia in 2025.
If you're watching, I'm coming with you. I'll follow on in my red van.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a two-seater.
And we can do interviews, the whole thing. Yeah. I'll just follow along.
Just live stream it as you go. Just put
100%.
Wouldn't that be fun? So we can take Bob Brinsmead with us. Like, let's go.
He'll be like 96 then or something.
He'll still be around. He's got all that fruit.
He will be going strong. Now, before we say farewell and you go to Dreamland, was there anything in the comments that you wanted to kind of? Ray's just said, "Little boys masquerading as men call others dude." I don't know if I don't remember saying that, but I do use the word dude, but in a kind of, hey dude, like observational. Anyway,
I feel like we're having our conversation and then the chat.
Oh, Ken Samples. Someone just reminded me. Thank you, Carl Wagner. Ken Samples. Very interesting, because I asked him in the interview, did he think that Walter Martin, kind of on his deathbed, had a moment saying, "Yeah, I was duped." Did he go from thinking, was I duped, to making a firm statement about that? And Ken seemed to think he didn't really know. And Ken also didn't really think that he didn't realize that the impact I might be wrong. I need to go and listen to it. And again, Ken does watch and comment sometimes, but he'd be worth having on the show again. But my thought was that he said that he wasn't even really aware that Adventists had really split so much over this.
Yeah, look, I'll just say this real quick. I think looking back, there's also a sense of, with all due respect, why do we Adventists have to do the song and dance to appease the evangelicals? Like, why? You know what I mean? Like, back then, I understand they had a lot more comparative power and influence, and being called a cult was bad news. I think today it's a little bit different. We do have better relations with evangelicals, of course, but also it's kind of like, who are you that we have to bend over backwards and contort ourselves to in your favor? I think this should be a two-way street. But anyway, so I think there's an element of this, like, that I look back on it now and I'm like, who cares what they think? I still want to have a good relation with them. Don't get me wrong. I affirm that, but, like, we can go around with a cult hammer and make people do all sorts of things to avoid us hitting them with it. So it's kind of my devil may care kind of attitude.
Yeah, just going to be your own person. Motor Sapien, I'll reiterate that I mentioned my #1 interview, and it's flown past us. So can you just quickly type in if you're still watching? Jimmy James, thanks for watching. Jimmy, Jesus is the only way. Just
all right.
Motor Sapien. I'm just going to randomly pick a couple of these. Someone's writing to Michael C, who said some things earlier. We'll leave that one because that's their side conversation. Thank you. Mark Anthony has written interestingly informative and friendly discussion. Enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you, Mark. And just again, I want to really recommend go and download, stream, whatever you call it, to the Advent History podcast. You will not regret it. Someone else has written, I can't see who wrote it because they've just got Facebook user. Adventists officially split in 1888. Stephen Beagles. And Stephen, don't forget, I'm going to have a quick chat with Matthew after the show, and then you and I have got to have our chat, so hang around. And look, I've discussed this a lot with people. The Adventists have this kind of split kind of thing going all the time, and I guess for me 57 is the ground zero of I even think that the split didn't really come till 1980, but there are lots of splits. But the significance of 57 is this connection with the general public. It's no longer an internal kind of discussion. And Motor Sapien, here we go.
I don't know that an official split in 1888.
No, there's never been an official split. No.
Well,
we need to do this. There's been definite splits, but I mean this progressive versus traditional. Yeah. I often say they split without realizing they did.
Right.
And the progressives are so inclusive and don't want to be defined that they don't really have a movement that has any power politically. But the other guys, the lunatic fringe, the Standish brothers, Concerned Brethren, they are organized. They are focused. They want us out, and they succeeded with me. So well done, guys. But they know who we are, and they want us out.
But look, the Weet-Bix still has you, though, Peter.
It has me every day. I honestly, Sanitarium, I'll give you a free endorsement every show. Just send me free Weet-Bix.
Free Weet-Bix.
Now, Motor Sapien, am I getting this right? GD, if you know John Paulson, then you must have heard Graham Max. Oh no, he's returning.
Pauline.
So quickly.
He said
back? Here we go. Now, number one is Gillian. I really felt a connection to her, and she called me her Tahoe friend. Pretty hard to beat that. Now, I have interviewed Gillian several times, Motor Sapien. Can you refer to one? Hey, I'm quickly going to bring up Arthur Klim, because some of these live ones, as you know, when you do a live to YouTube, they disappear after the show. And I hate that it does that. But apparently there's a new button you can push when you log into YouTube that you can click see the live comments. And Arthur Klim's coming on soon to do a series with me on the Fred Veltman Desire of Ages.
Oh,
can't wait
good.
for that. You might want to kind of watch that and offer some thoughts.
Yeah.
Matthew Lucio's podcasts are some of the most entertaining and instructive on the internet. Good interview. That is true. Honestly, they are incredible. Like I said, I've literally right up to the end of QOD, and I've got a bit of catching up to do. Have listened to every single one.
Well, like I said, I'm going to send you the gold star here.
Yeah.
You want a T-shirt?
The T-shirt. Send me. What was the other T-shirt? Have you got that you could hold up?
Oh, I don't. But yeah, there's a bunch of them on the website, and you let me know which one you want. I'll send one to you.
I love both of them. I think I need 2 gold stars. No, yeah, Motorcycle. It's just flying so fast. You did say Gillian, but do you remember which episode, season, and episode? Hey, and it doesn't really matter. But we're really, they're just flying. They're flying so fast.
Yeah, that's why I'm going to get super chats here, guys.
I know. I would love to get that. That's what you're going to have to tell me. How do you get the super chat? I know I've got now the 1,000+ subscribers, which is great. And Matthew Cortman has offered to help me a little bit to get the word out.
Yeah, he's good. I like Matthew. He's a good friend.
I've talked with her on almost all of your interviews since you interviewed. Yeah, okay. So cool. We'll gather them together. The Psycho book. I accidentally said, because what's the term now? I'm confused in my own head. The biology. What does he call it? I've got a minute.
I keep wanting to say psychohistory, but that's just the foundation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh dear. So well, I think we will leave it there. There's a great conversation going on there. Don't forget, in the description, if you want to join the Facebook group. Interesting, we often only have a smaller group watching live from the Facebook group now. It's mainly coming from the other groups, but the conversations go crazy there, and you come and join the group. It's a private group. There we go, psychobiography. That's right, the psychobiography. So we're going to get you back next week. I hope so. Well, either way, we're going to have a part 2 because I feel like we've had a really wonderful conversation today. I've been a pig in mud, and I'd love another 1 or 2, and definitely going to do the Bob Brinsmead one. We're going to ramp the efforts up on that.
Cool.
So thank you so much for joining me today. Stick around when the show's ended. I've got to pick your brain a couple of things. And Steve Beagle, stick around as well. I'll be sending you a message. So, yeah.
All right.
Our guest today, thank him very much. Shoot up the love hearts in Facebook. Pastor Matthew J. Lucio, founder of Advent History Podcast. Go and do yourself a favor and start listening to that today. Until next week, see you, Matthew.
All right. We'll see you. Thanks, guys.